Chapter 1097. He did not hold back this time. All the great spirit in his body turned into Hao Ian's divine light and gushed out along with the momentum of the blade. What was more terrifying was that there was also a killing soul in the blade. That was the killing soul of the border army of the Tang Empire. He started cultivating it at Shubi Lake, and it was only perfected after the massacre in the city of Wei. The dark blade fell on the head of the National Master this time. This time, the National Master could no longer move his body like a ghost, because his body was fixed by Yu Lian at the stream. The National Master put his palms together and clamped Ning Kei's blade. Ning Kei lowered his head and continued to move forward in silence. The National Master's face suddenly turned extremely pale. The wooden prayer beads hanging around his neck broke one by one at a speed visible to the naked eye. They turned into wood dregs and were blown away by the wind. This blood-sacrificing array was indeed marvelous. The array would be wherever the National Master was. Even though they were dozens of miles apart, the arrays were still connected. Therefore, his whereabouts were hard to track as they reflected each other. But now, Yu Lian caught his blade in the west, and Ning Kei slashed him in the east. The senior sister and junior brother from the academy used the simplest method to break his trap. Both sides were breaking the array. Which side should the National Master defend? Defend both sides? Even if he had the killing soul of the entire Golden Tribe Royal Court, how could he defeat the attack from two powerful people like Yu Lian and Ning Kei? As the wooden prayer beads broke faster and faster, the National Master's face became paler and paler. He felt that the power in Ning Kei's iron blade was endless, and he did not know how long he could hold on. The young monk's face also became more and more pale by the dried-up stream in the west. He felt that the power coming from the blade was endless, and he did not know how long Yu Lian could hold on. The young monk screamed in anger and pain. The machete in his hand trembled violently. Almost at the same time, dozens of miles away in the east, the old National Master on the horse carriage also screamed unwillingly. The wooden prayer beads hanging suddenly broke, and a terrifying aura shrouded the entire carriage array. The dozen or so high priests around the formation suddenly turned into a dozen or so blossoms of blood. Without any warning, a dozen or so high-level high priests died just like that. Moreover, he had died such a miserable death. The blood was like a fountain, spraying toward the array of carriages from all directions. Ning Kei did not know what was hidden in the blood, but he felt a little uneasy. Swoosh, 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 swoosh. A bloody rainstorm fell from the sky. All the blood of the 13 high priests was sucked out by the blood-sacrificing formation and finally sprinkled on the iron boxes in the air. Some of the blood seeped into the white skulls, and some fell on the ground, wetting the weeds and making them look like bloody dew. Ning Kei let out a muffled groan, and the crystal water droplet in his body suddenly burst open. Vast amounts of great spirit poured into his limbs, and then turned into Hao Ian's divine light, spreading out through countless pores. In an instant, his body began to burn, turning him into a flaming man. The blood rain that fell from the sky made sizzling sounds after falling into the flames. There were also faint ear-piercing screams and cries of pain, and there was even a faint burnt smell. Not a single drop of the high priest's blood fell on Ning Quebec. But he could not relax, because the National Master in front of the blade suddenly became much stronger. The wrinkles on his face were flattening at a speed visible to the naked eye, and he looked 10 years younger in an instant. Could this be the strongest move of the blood-sacrificing formation? Ning Kei did not know that by the stream dozens of miles away in the west, the young monk had suddenly disappeared. The machete was deeply inserted into the dry and cracked ground. The National Master used the lives of more than 10 high priests to do one thing, and that was to reunite the blood-sacrificing formation. In other words, the young monk had instantly returned to the field. This was the reason why Ning Kei saw that the National Master had become younger quickly. Ning Kei did not know the reason, but he knew that he had to temporarily avoid it. The iron cutlass turned in the air and avoided the young National Master's strong will. Without hesitation, He dragged the cutlass and drew something in the blood rain with his trembling right hand. The National Master chose to return to the east instead of letting the old National Master's soul return to the young monk's body. The reason was simple. In his eyes, Ning-Ke was still not as scary as Yulian. He subconsciously wanted to avoid Yulian. The east and west were dozens of miles away, and he used the formation to return as fast as lightning. He believed that he would have enough time to kill Ning-Ke before Yulian arrived, and then he could focus on dealing with Yulian. The young National Master left the horse carriage, and with the flow of the chi of heaven and earth, he flew towards Ning Quebec. The lightness, the freedom. He was indeed a powerhouse from the grassland. His familiarity with the heaven and earth was far beyond the cultivators from the Central Plains, and Ning-Ke could not compare. Ning-Ke held the cutlass horizontally and flew backwards, but his speed was not as fast as the National Master. But he was not afraid. He stared at the National Master's eyes silently, and his wrist turned again. There was a soft sound. The young National Master's face turned pale again, and there was a clear blood mark between his fingers. That was the talisman of two that Ning-Ke wrote under the cover of the Divine Light. If the National Master did not have the entire blood-sacrificing formation, his entire arm would have been broken. The National Master was expressionless, and he flew forward again. Dozens of miles. The stream was only dozens of miles away, and Yulian would arrive in a moment. He had to be faster. However, it was a pity that he still underestimated Yulian's speed. In the sky full of dark clouds, a shrill howl suddenly sounded. A clear, thin line cut through the entire layer of clouds, drawing from the west to the east and ending at the battlefield full of flames. There was a loud bang. Yulian jumped down from the sky. This time, she did not walk over from the water, but really jumped down from the gray sky. The National Master could not avoid it like how he dealt with Ning-Ke previously, and could only take it head-on. It was as if a hammer had smashed on a giant bell. The entire grassland seemed to have heard the loud bang. In the broken carriage, between the iron boxes that were suspended in the air, there was strong chi flying everywhere, and there was blood everywhere. After a long time, the blood fog gradually disappeared, and the bell gradually quieted down. There were a few deep wrinkles at the corner of the National Master's eyes. Under his feet was the cracked ground. Behind him was the iron box that contained the white bones. And in front of him was Ning-Ke, who was covered in divine light, and Yulian, who had her hands behind her back. There was silence, or perhaps she was adjusting her breath and resting. I've lost. The National Master looked at the Academy's senior brother and junior sister and smiled with some difficulty. He said, Actually, I've lost the moment you saw through me. I never thought that I could defeat both of you at the same time. Yulian was expressionless, and she did not speak. Ning-Ke was very calm. He said, Then why don't you kill yourself? What are you doing? But it's still very difficult for you to kill me. The Imperial Preceptor squinted his eyes and looked at the 10 metal boxes floating in the air. He looked at the white human skulls in the boxes and said slowly, I've already merged with this formation. If you can't break this formation, you won't be able to hurt my foundation. And the power of the human world can't break this formation. Ning-Ke said, There is no array in the world that can't be broken. Even if this array contains the killing power of the Golden Tribe for hundreds of years, when I mobilize more than 100,000 Tang soldiers, I can easily break it by spitting. But that needs time. The National Master looked at him quietly and said, Yulian suddenly said, I never like things that are too troublesome. Her yellow dress floated in the air, and she reached out to hit one of the iron boxes. Previously, when she jumped down from the sky, the Grand Tutor was covered in blood. At the same time, a crack appeared on the corner of the metal box. Now, as her petite palm landed, there was another terrifying sound that reverberated in the grassland. Boom! She slapped again. Boom! The National Master's face became extremely pale. He sat cross-legged on the last horse carriage and struggled to maintain the array. But Ning-Ke did nothing. He put the iron cutlass back into the sheath and walked under Yulian. He quietly watched what she was doing, as if he was enjoying a good show. Yu Lian slapped for the third time, and the crack on the iron box finally widened. The iron box that Ning Ke could not cut open with his iron cutlass with all his strength, and the iron box that was made of secret iron refined by the fire of the soul for a long time, was cracked by her small hand. The National Master looked at Yu Lian and frowned. He said, "Do you really think that you can break my array with your physical strength? 23 years cicada cultivation. You think too highly of yourself." As expected, as he finished his words, the smell of blood came out from the depths of the white bones in the iron box, and then the crack on the iron box became smaller at a speed visible to the naked eye. Yu Lian frowned and seemed to be a little displeased. Ning Ke looked up at her without saying anything. The wind on the grassland blew the hem of her dress. Yu Lian took a breath. The wind around the carriage formation was so strong that the yellow skirt was fluttering and looked like a flag. She took a deep breath, causing her slightly curvy chest to heave up and down. Previously in the city of Wei, Ada's deep breath had sucked in half the air and the chi of heaven and earth in the street into his body. Yu Lian seemed to be sucking in all the chi of heaven and earth in the whole grassland into her body. She raised her small, white hand again. Her hand fell on the iron box again. There was a loud buzzing sound. The broken pieces of the carriage were blown in all directions by the violent hurricane. Ning Ke groaned and resisted the power by force. Blood flowed out from the ears of the National Master. The violent sound wave spread far and wide, even hundreds of miles away. In front of Kaiping Market, the cavalries of both sides who were fighting desperately suddenly stopped waving their weapons and covered their ears with their pale faces in pain. The war horses were even more pitiful and fell to the ground in pain. Yu Lian's small face was also a little pale, but her expression was still like ice, transparent and indifferent. She reached out and patted the iron box again. With a cracking sound, the iron box was broken. The yellow skirt kept flashing above the wilderness. She hit more than 10 times, and the horrible sound wave spread around, and the iron boxes were broken. Countless white skulls fell to the ground with a rustle. A pure Hao-Ian divine flame gushed out from Ning Ke's palm and instantly burned those skulls to ashes. Those resentful souls that were imprisoned by the National Master and the High Priest finally got a real release. The blood sacrifice array was broken. The National Master was covered with blood, and his pale and old face was full of blood and sweat. He looked at Yu Lian, and his eyes were full of confusion. He did not understand how she could break the blood sacrifice array that he had prepared for years with only her strength. "I don't think too highly of myself." Yu Lian returned to the ground and walked to him with her hands behind her back. She looked down at him and said, "You are standing too low, and the power of the human world cannot break the array. You don't even know what is power." The wind on the grassland gently blew the yellow skirt. She was so small and thin, but so tall and big. She was a little girl, but also a great guru. The National Master used the power of the whole clan to make the blood sacrifice array, and he even used the secret method of witchcraft to incarnate. But all of these were meaningless in front of her. No matter how magical witchcraft, Buddhist Dharma, or Taoist canon was, it was no match for her power. She was the Grand Master of the Devil's Doctrine, famous for her mystery. She had disappeared in the cultivation world for 23 years, and no one knew that she had been practicing hairpin-style, small regular script by the east window of the old library of the academy. That was because the headmaster wanted her to calm down. She calmed her mind and stopped thinking about other things. Conspiracies and Dharma access were no longer important. She cultivated herself to be extremely pure. Purity was in the mind, and purity was in the power. She returned to the origin of the cultivation of the Devil's Doctrine and returned to the most correct path. So she became the most powerful person in the Devil's Doctrine for thousands of years. She was not immortal, but she could move mountains. She could even move a mountain, not to mention a few iron boxes. Salute to the bean, I don't think I have failed. The National Master looked at the blood flowing like a waterfall on his body, and his old face suddenly showed the last bit of confidence. He looked at Yu Lian and Ning Ke and said, "At least I saved the last bloodline of the Golden Tribe." According to the time, this terrifying battle between the powerhouses in the north of the city of Wei had lasted for half a day. Chan Yu and the duo cavalry might have run more than 100 miles away. It doesn't matter how far they run. Is it meaningful? Ning Ke looked at him and said, "You know very well that they will all die." At this moment, snow suddenly fell from the sky. Although the wilderness was much colder than the central plains, and there were times when it suddenly snowed at the end of spring, it was still warm around the city of Wei yesterday. Why did it suddenly snow now? Ning Ke looked up and found that it was the dark clouds that were summoned by the blood sacrifice array. Because they had blocked the sunlight for too long, the clouds below started to frost, and now it finally fell. The snow became heavier and gradually became a blizzard. During the blizzard, it was the most difficult to track, unless it was a real powerhouse. The National Master thought that this was an opportunity for the Golden Tribe Royal Court, because he had already guessed that Tang should be leading the Desolate Men to resist the counterattack of the Divine Halls of West Hill's cavalry in the Eastern Wilderness. Only Yu Lian from the Academy came, and she should not be fighting again. "Look, it's snowing." He looked at the snowy sky and said with a smile, "This is the salt that Tungri sprinkled on the human world. It will protect his most devout followers and guide them out of the valley." Yu Yin looked up at the sky and slightly squinted her eyes. She said that girl always liked to add too much salt when she was cooking in the back of the mountain. Now that I think about it, it's really annoying. The National Master was slightly stunned, and then he understood what she was talking about. He could not help but sigh bitterly. As a devout follower of Hao Yan, it was really painful to talk to those who had lived with Hao Yan for a long time in the back of the mountain of the Academy. In the city of Wei was like that, and now his relatives were like that. The blizzard came very suddenly. In just a moment, the wilderness was covered with a thick layer of snow. The snow was so dazzling that it was hard to see the scenery in the distance. Suddenly, a soul-stirring roar came from the depths of the blizzard. It should be the roar of some kind of beast, but the sound was too loud. It seemed that the beast must be extremely huge to have a resonating cavity that could transmit the sound in all directions. The National Master looked into the blizzard and faintly saw many black shadows approaching slowly. Those black shadows were very tall, and each of them was like a small mountain. As the National Master of the Golden Tribe, he could naturally guess what was coming. His expression suddenly changed. Logically speaking, it was impossible for such a powerful beast to come to such a place in the south. The earth trembled slightly, and the snow was shaken until it became soft. Those hill-like black shadows slowly walked into the blizzard and came to the front of the three of them. It was a pack of snow wolves that appeared in the north of the city of Wei. A pack of snowfield direwolves. Hundreds of snowfield direwolves the size of small hills stood silently in the wasteland like a snowy river. Compared to the time when they were forced to go to the south, the current snowfield direwolves were obviously different. They were no longer thin and tired. Their once protruding shoulder blades were now covered by strong muscles and snow-white fur. It was all thanks to the guidance of the eldest brother that they could obtain a stable source of food in the wilderness that was close to the human settlements in the south. The National Master was a little confused. He did not understand why these terrifying and powerful creatures would appear here. The female wolf in the front had smooth and soft snow-white fur. Her expression was gentle, like a beautiful snowy mountain. On the back of the female wolf, there was an ordinary skinny male wolf. In front of the female wolf, there was a relatively smaller snow wolf. Judging from their expressions, these three should be a family. Looking at this scene, the National Master's expression became extremely interesting. Until today, he did not know that the leader of the snowfield direwolves in the northern taiga forest turned out to be an ordinary male wolf. What happened next made him even more shocked and speechless. He saw that ordinary male wolf straightened his body and saluted Yu Lian and Ning Ke with hands folded in front like a human being. And Yu Lian and Ning Ke also saluted back seriously. The National Master remembered the black donkey and the tens of thousands of wild horses in the wilderness outside Guha a few days ago. He felt that the wind in the wilderness was getting colder. It had nothing to do with the falling snow or the blood loss. It was only related to these scenes. Did all of them belong to the academy? He suddenly felt that Changsheng was really unfair. Or maybe Changsheng really could not do anything to the academy. Ningke whistled. The young snow wolf wagged its tail happily at him, but did not run to him. Instead, it turned around with the big team of snow wolves and headed to the back of the blizzard. Since they were part of the academy, they naturally had to do something for the academy. Looking at the snow wolves disappearing in the blizzard, Ningke turned to the national master and said, "The golden tent will no longer exist after today." Chapter 1098. The national master lay in a pool of blood with a complicated expression. He was confused, desperate, and relieved. He could not change the fate of his own tribe, so he was no longer responsible. Perhaps immortality has truly abandoned us a long time ago. If Chanyu did not die, how could he have made such a mistake? The Golden Tribe has lost, but do you really want to kill us? He looked at Yulian and said tiredly, "Ningke and we have the city of Wei between us. What about you?" The hatred between the tribe and the desolate man was 1,000 years ago. Yulian did not say anything. The national master panted and said, "Don't forget that you desolate man used to enslave us for countless years. I don't think we owe you anything. You have no reason to do this. We want this grassland. We can give it to you. You can't afford it. We want it. The wolves want it. Youngest uncle's donkey and his horse want it, and the millions of slaves that Junemo will bring out from the underground. There are too many people who want it." Yulian put her hands behind her back and looked at the grassland and the wind and snow. She thought of the desolate man's thousands of years of wandering. She said slowly without any extra emotion on her face, "What about us?" The national master was agitated and said angrily, "The Abbey Dean wants Haoyan Taoism to perish, but do we not have the right to live? Do we have to die?" Yulian looked back at him as if she was puzzled by his question. She raised her eyebrows and said, "Of course you have the right to live. Everyone is born equal. As long as you come to this world, you have the right to live. Since that is the case, of course the strongest will live. You grew up in the wilderness. How can you not understand this? Have you ever seen a tiger or a wolf reasoning with a rabbit? If you don't want to be a rabbit, then learn to eat meat." This logic was very simple, very unreasonable, and very cold. The national master was silent for a long time and then murmured, "But we don't have to kill all of us, right? Just like 1,000 years ago, our tribe can continue to be the desolate man's slaves." He looked at Yulian with pleading eyes. Yulian looked at Ning, Quebec Ning, K, did not say anything, and just looked into the wind and snow. "Our teacher taught us that slavery is a very wrong thing. It is wrong to enslave anyone, including aliens. So the desolate man will not keep you as slaves." Yulian said, "Then I'll have to kill all of you." The nation master's last hope was shattered. He shook his head with a bitter smile and said, "If the headmaster knew that his student had twisted his words like this, would he die of anger?" Yulian looked up at the sky and remained silent for a long time. Then she said expressionlessly, "He's already dead. If what we do can make him return to the human world out of anger, then we can do anything." Ningke also looked up at the sky. There were falling snow and dark clouds, but there was no moon. However, he still looked up at the sky with his senior sister. Then he remembered that he seemed to have said something similar. The disciples of the academy really hated their irresponsible teacher. Hate was not accurate. It should be said that they were annoyed, not annoyed, but annoyed. Ningke and Yu Lian were the most annoyed. All these years, Jun and Mo had been fighting against the Buddhism sect in the Western wilderness. An eldest brother had not been involved in the affairs of the academy. In fact, Yu Lian and Ning Ke had been handling the affairs of the academy. This was definitely not what the enemies of the academy wanted to see. The spring breeze blew, and the smell of blood gradually dissipated. The stream dozens of miles away in the west had already dried up, and the little oasis had also disappeared with the wind. No one knew where it had gone. The blood-sacrificing array had become a ruin made of the broken walls of the carriage. Countless ghastly human bones had been purified by Hao Yin's divine flame. The nation master finally closed his eyes. Yu Yin looked at Ning Ke and said, "I'm going to recuperate. The rest is up to you." In the previous battle, she had fought against the killing souls of the entire Golden Tribe royal court alone. Although she had Ning Ke's help, she still suffered an unimaginable impact. Even if she won, she had paid a great price. Ning Ke thought of the most troublesome part of the plan and said, "I'll wait for you at Peach Mountain." Yu Yin turned around and walked into the depths of the grassland. Suddenly, she thought of something and stopped. She asked, "When I was floating in the air, did you keep looking up at my skirt?" Ning Ke answered with a smile, "Senior sister, you did a good job." Yu Yin did not bother to answer him. She shook her body and disappeared into the depths of the grassland. Ning Ke shook his head and put his iron cutlass back into the sheath. Hearing the dense hoofbeats behind him, he turned around and saw the smoke and dust around the city of Wei. Su Qi led the cavalrymen of the Northern Battlefront Army to kill all the grassland cavalrymen who were left behind to intercept them. They had started to chase the fleeing Golden Tribe royal court. With hundreds of snowfield direwolves leading the cavalrymen of the Northern Battlefront Army, Ning Ke was not worried at all, even though Tang was pinned down in the eastern wilderness by Long Qing and the cavalrymen of the Divine Halls of West Hill. The Golden Tribe royal court was already at its end. The smoke and dust were flying in the wilderness to the north of the city of Wei. The hoofbeats were resounding. Thousands of cavalrymen of the Tang Empire chased deep into the grassland to bury Chanyu. Ning Ke watched the scene quietly until the wilderness became quiet again. Then he turned around and walked toward the city of Wei. The snow had stopped, and the dark clouds were gradually dispersing. The spring sunshine on the grassland was very bright. The old yellow city actually had a fresh smell. Maybe it was because of the hundreds of weeds growing in the mud wall in front of the city gate. Those stubborn weeds were the biggest enemy of the rammed mud wall. It was strange that no matter what was mixed in the mud, no matter how hard it was hammered, those weeds could not be stopped from taking root and sprouting again. Ning Ke remembered clearly that when he was in the city of Wei, all the soldiers and civilians in the city would go around to remove weeds under the leadership of General Ma to prevent the city wall from being damaged. The city of Wei had been in the hands of the grassland barbarians these years. They did not care about the city wall being damaged. After a few years, those weeds came back to life, as if they were laughing at the futile work of the Tangs. The blood in the city had been gradually absorbed by the yellow sand. The grassland barbarians' corpses and collapsed buildings were everywhere. The Tang army in charge of logistics was cleaning the battlefield. No one noticed Ning Quebec. He walked through the old city and looked at the familiar streets and buildings. He thought of the familiar people and things. It was as if he could still smell the smell of wine and roasted chicken. He did not enter the tavern, nor did he enter General Ma's house. He did not enter any other place because he knew that those places had long since been deserted. The small courtyard beside the stream in the remote part of the city was still there. It was his and Song Song's small courtyard. There was a hunting knife sticking out of the wall of the small courtyard. It was the one he did not take away. He looked at the hunting knife and was silent for a while. Then he pushed the door and walked into the room. Looking at the bedding left by the grassland barbarians, he frowned in disgust and threw all those things on the ground in the courtyard, ready to burn them later. He found a bamboo chair and moved it to the field. He lay down and closed his eyes. The bright sunlight stung his eyes through his eyelids. He felt a little sore, so he closed his eyes tighter and lay in silence until he was about to fall asleep. After a long time, he woke up. He opened his eyes and looked at the familiar small courtyard where he had lived for many years. He stretched out his hand in the air as he had done in the past. Unfortunately, there was no teapot. Just like now, when he raised his face, there would not be a warm, wet towel placed on it. If he said it was hot, there would not be a pair of cold, white feet in his arms. If he said he was hungry, there would not be a bowl of noodles with fried eggs. The city of Wei was still there. The tavern was still there. The small courtyard was still there. The brick bed was still there. The box on the opposite side of the brick bed was still there. The courtyard wall was still there. The hunting knife hidden in the wall was still there. The silver notes were still in his arms. But she was no longer here. Everyone was no longer here. She was no longer here. Ning Ke lay on the bamboo chair and looked at the blue sky. He was thinking about many things. Before he left the city of Wei, he told General Ma, "Don't grow old and don't die. Wait for me to show my filial piety." When he left the city of Wei, he told all the men in the city that if he could not make a name for himself, he would not come back. Now he had reached the top position in the world. He finally had the face to come back, but it was too late. The war between the Golden Tribe Royal Court and the Tang Empire was destined to change the situation of the world. But for him, this war was actually another thing. It had nothing to do with the world. It was only related to the city of Wei. He wanted to take back the city of Wei. He wanted to avenge the city of Wei. At the same time, he wanted to find someone in the city of Wei. Time passed slowly on the bamboo chair. Several days later, the sound of hooves came from the stream opposite the small courtyard. It gradually slowed down, followed by the sound of a password. Situ Elan nodded slightly and responded to the salute of the Tang army. She walked to the tent opposite the small courtyard and handed the horse to a soldier. Then she looked at the small courtyard and asked, "What did he say?" A general shook his head and said, "He insisted." After a moment of silence, Situ Elan asked, "How many captives?" The general said, "There are some small battles around the 7 stockade villages, but the situation is basically under control. If you include the slaves, women, and children, there are at least more than 400,000 people." Situ Elan slightly raised her eyebrows and said, "Even so, he still insisted?" The general did not say anything. It seemed that he did not have much opinion on the insistence of the people in the courtyard. Situ Elan looked at the small courtyard not far away. After a moment of silence, she walked over. "This is a massacre." She looked at Ning Ke on the bamboo chair and said. She was calm, but her voice was slightly trembling. Ning Ke opened his eyes and looked at her. He said, "You have been in the army for many years. Haven't you seen a massacre?" Situ Elan was silent for a long time and said, "According to the rule, as long as the woman is not dead, she will not die. Even the most barbaric tribe on the grassland will do the same. This is the courtyard where she and I lived many years ago. We have lived here for many years." Ning Ke stood up from the bamboo chair and pointed to the small courtyard. Then he motioned her to follow him out of the courtyard and walk to the street in the city. He began to introduce to her every brick, stone, grass, and wood in the city of Wei. "The people in this city are all people I know. They all died that year." The grassland people broke through the city gate and broke into the city. They held machetes and killed anyone they saw. At that time, did they distinguish between men and women and tall or short? Walking out of the city gate, he stood on the meadow and looked at the glaring weeds on the mud wall of the city of Wei. He shook his head and said, "I don't want this kind of thing to strengthen my determination and convince you and other Tang generals. I just want to tell you where my determination comes from. No one can stop me from taking revenge." Situ Elan followed his eyes and looked at the city of Wei. Thinking of her comrades and clansmen who died in the frontier fortress these years, she struggled and said hesitantly, "But the academy doesn't teach like this. As I said, no one can stop my revenge, even if the headmaster of academy comes back." Ning Ke looked at the bright moon that had just appeared in the depth of the sunset and said after a long time of silence. Finally, he pointed to the dozens of weeds on the wall of the city of Wei and said, "Maybe this is a serious sin, but I don't care. I only know that we must remove the roots when we cut the weeds. Otherwise, we will be in trouble." A few days later, the whole grassland was soaked with the blood of the grassland people. In this war, the Tang people who won firmly carried out Ning Ke's will just like they did outside Guha. They did not leave any captives and naturally did not leave any trouble. But the machetes of the Tang army became a little blunt. Ning Ke and Situ Elan came to the meadow outside the city of Wei again. The Tang army gathered in the wilderness looked at the two figures on the meadow with complicated emotions in their eyes. Those emotions were fanatical worship, but also cold awe. As a fierce army, the tens of thousands of cavalrymen outside the city of Wei had killed many people. They had also seen the horrible scene of the so-called massacre on the grassland. But they had never seen people kill like this. The whole grassland seemed to be watered by blood. There was a pungent smell of blood everywhere. The mosquitoes and flies smelled the smell and made a numbing buzzing sound. If not for the tactical array master, the Tang army would not be able to stay here. However, the tactical array could keep the mosquitoes and flies away and dilute the smell of blood, but it could not block the sight. Dozens of miles north of the city of Wei, on the flat wilderness, there was a hill. Because it was too far away, they could not see clearly. The hill was shining in the morning light. The Tang army all knew what that hill was. Every time they looked at the hill, they would feel a little cold. That was a hill piled up with the heads of the grassland people. Ning Ke stood on the meadow and looked at the hill of human heads in the distance. He looked very calm. There was no fear, and no abnormal fanaticism. For him, it was just something that he had to do. My nickname in the grassland was the Woodchopper of Shubi Lake. He looked at the vast wilderness and said slowly, "Both the horse gang and the cavalrymen of the palace were afraid of my cavalry team, because I can really kill people." Sidu Ilan did not say anything. These days, she was a little numb. Ning Ke continued, "When I was in Chang'an, I told others that the world did not have many opportunities to see me kill people in the past, but there will be many opportunities in the future." Sidu Ilan looked at his profile and said, "I hope there will never be such an opportunity in the future." Ning Ke thought for a while and said, "I hope so too, but it depends on whether the world can cooperate." Chapter 1099. Situ Ilan sighed in her heart and said goodbye to him. She led her horse and walked down the meadow. The battle in the 7 stockade villages had ended, and the cleanup of the battlefield was basically completed. Now she was going to lead the cavalry into the grassland and follow Suchi's footsteps to make the final attack on the Golden Tribe. The war was over, but the killing had just begun. She hoped that the world would not give Ning Ke such a chance again, but she had to continue killing. She led her horse to the meadow and could not help but look back. She saw the sun was rising and Ning Ke was standing in it. The edge of his body was glowing with a golden light, looking somewhat sacred. If she had the chance to see the scene of Yi Su becoming a sage in the capital of the Kingdom of Song, she might have linked the two together. However, Ning Ke was different from Yi Su. He stood in the light and became a shadow. He was a little dim and not easy to see clearly. Situ Ilan suddenly sympathized with him. Hundreds of thousands of people died because of his words, but he was so calm and indifferent. Because he did not find Sang Sang, he had no love or hate for the world. This kind of person was naturally the most terrible, but also the most pitiful. What was he living for? The Tang army set off, and the city of Wei became quiet again. Without the isolation of array masters, the terrifying buzzing of countless mosquitoes and flies reverberated between heaven and earth like thunder. Occasionally, dark clouds would cover the sun, and under the clouds, hundreds of vultures would fly over while letting out unpleasant cries. Ning Ke did not care about these. He had never seen so many corpses and blood in his life. But he had seen too many horrible scenes like this, so many that he was tired of it. He walked into the wilderness that was filled with the smell of blood. He looked down at the weeds that had been congealed by blood and the soil that had been congealed by blood. He pondered as he walked until he arrived in front of the Human Head Mountain. He was pondering, not sighing, but carefully feeling the aura. The powerful blood-sacrificing array of the national master of the Golden Tribe gave him some hints. It turned out that the power of the human world not only came from the living, but also from the dead. What should he do if he wanted to use this power? Many footprints were left on the blood-soaked plains. Amidst the slapping sounds, the footprints accumulated a shallow amount of blood, a strong fishy smell, and a lot of resentment, until it formed a clear mark. Ning Ke walked in the wilderness for 3 days and left many footprints. If someone were to sit on the clouds and look down at the grassland, he would see a very complicated pattern, with the city of Wei as the center, the Human Head Mountain as the Achilles heel, the dozens of miles of blood-stained wilderness as the curtain, and his footprints as the lines. It was so complicated that it was hard to imagine. This pattern was an extremely complicated array, or in other words, an extremely large talisman. Then he left the city of Wei and went to Kaiping. This time, he observed for a shorter period of time. He only walked for a day because he had become much more familiar with it. After that, he went to Chu City and went through all the 7 strongholds. As a result, there was an extremely complicated blood formation outside each stronghold. If the person looking down from the sky had flown a little higher, he should have been able to see that these 7 complicated blood formations were like 7 ink dots that formed a straight line. The line was sloppy and random. It did not look like a complete stroke, but more like the beginning of a stroke. The 7 extremely complicated formations were just ink dots. The straight line formed by the 7 formations was just the beginning of a stroke. Then how long would this stroke be if it was completed? How magnificent would it be? Before Ninkei wrote this stroke, no one would ever know. After arranging the 7 formations, Ninkei returned to the city of Wei. It was still quiet in the city of Wei. Only the big black horse and the broken sedan were waiting for him. The big black horse walked to him without showing any joy of reunion, because it clearly felt Ninkei's exhaustion and sensed his true thoughts, so it lowered its head. Ninkei reached out and gently stroked its neck. It was not that he was comforting it, but that it was comforting him in this way. Countless grassland people were killed, and their blood watered the grassland. Everything, including all the sins and notoriety, was just to write that stroke, to relieve his greatest uneasiness. That faint fear and uneasiness were like whips that constantly whipped his body, causing waves of sharp pain in the depths of his soul, causing him to become more and more anxious. He was in a hurry to leave the city of Wei and head south, because he could not find her in the city of Wei. I can't find her. The Abbey Dean, eldest brother, and the drunkard probably haven't found her either. But I have to find her, so I want to ask for your help. Ninkei looked at the black donkey in the broken sedan and earnestly asked for help. The black donkey was silent for a while, subconsciously scratching the grapes on the plate with its front hooves. Even though it was arrogant and lazy, it was clear about the importance of this matter. Its former master was killed by her. An unpleasant quacking sound resounded in the field outside the city of Wei. Ninkei finally felt a little relieved after getting the promise from the black donkey. He turned over and rode on the big black horse. He gently squeezed the horse's abdomen, and with a cheerful neigh, black lightning reappeared between the heaven and the earth. A straight line appeared on the field, pointing straight to the south. The heaven and the earth were the grassland, and he was the wild horse, constantly searching. Compared to the war in the northern grassland, the Central Plains was not peaceful either. Flames of war were raging everywhere. The cavalrymen of the divine halls of West Hill, led by Long Qing, with the full cooperation of the Yin Kingdom, fought against the Tang army from the north camp and went deep into the wilderness, helping the remaining forces of the left tent palace to fight against the desolate. After the divine halls of West Hill completely controlled the South Jin Kingdom, they ordered the army of the South Jin Kingdom to divide into 2 groups. Zhao Nanhai led the cavalrymen of the divine halls of West Hill and the mighty army of the South Jin Kingdom, preparing to attack the great river kingdom on the other side of the river. The wind on both sides of the river became sharper. The old members of the Divine Hall of Judgment who were loyal to Yi Hongyu carried out bloody assassinations in the Divine Halls of West Hill and the South Jin Kingdom, trying to slow down the coalition army's march to the south. The real bloody battles did not take place on these battlefields, but in many inconspicuous places, such as an inconspicuous small county, a dilapidated Taoist temple in a town, a fishing village by the sea, or an iron mine by the Fujian River in Qinghai Prefecture. These were the places where people died the most. This was because the spread of the news stream was rooted in poverty and anger, so it naturally started from these places. The divine halls of West Hill suppression of the news stream was naturally carried out in these places. After Yisu's death, the news stream was severely suppressed, but it did not take long before it regained its life with the secret support of the Tang Empire. It even felt like it was reborn from the fire. Chen Pipi had left Chong and a long time ago. He inherited his senior brother's will and preached everywhere. He silently and firmly carried out the established policy, vowing to overthrow the old Taoism's rule over the world. The disciples, hidden in different places, accepted Chenpipi's leadership without any hesitation. They respected their master Yi Su as a saint and Chenpipi as the pope. They began to launch an all-out attack on the old world. The spread of a new stream was in full swing in the human world. The suppression of the new stream by the divine halls of West Hill was as heavy as the mountains and the sea. They did not bestow any divine grace upon the new stream. There was a building in the government office of a small county that had been burnt black. It was said that it was set on fire by the thugs of the new stream a few days ago. But the fire was a bit strange. It had not rained for many days, and the air was extremely dry, but the fire did not spread. It only burned down a remote wing where a pregnant maidservant lived. Today, the county magistrate concluded the case with unimaginable efficiency. More than 10 followers of the new stream were escorted to the only Taoist temple in the county. In front of all the people in the county, they were put on the fire execution platform and burned into charred corpses in a moment. There was some fear in people's eyes, or no sympathy, but fear and anger. They noticed that the eyes of the followers of the new stream were filled with anger and despair. They opened their mouths in the fire, but could not say a word. Many people knew the relationship between the maidservant and the county magistrate. And the uncle of the county magistrate's wife was a divine priest in the Taoist temple. The wife was very jealous. In a fishing village by the East Sea, for the same ridiculous reason, more than 20 followers of the new stream were tied to death by the men who were loyal to the patriarch and the deacons sent by the divine priest of the state city. Then they were tied with heavy stones. With a terrifying splash, the followers of the new stream were thrown into the sea and turned into pitiful souls. In front of a dilapidated Taoist temple in a small town, the divine priest, who was pushed against the wall by the crowd the day before yesterday and injured his forehead, looked at the angry people. His pale face was full of murderous intent, and his eyes were full of vicious flames. He shouted sternly, "Whoever dares not to pay will end up like these people." 7 armored cavalrymen of the divine halls of West Hill stood at the stone steps of the Taoist temple indifferently. They looked down at the angry people who dared not to fight back. In front of their horses, there were more than 10 dead bodies lying in a pool of blood. Qinghe Prefecture seemed to be much more peaceful compared to those places that were full of bloodshed. There were many people here, especially the young people who were loyal to the late Tang Empire. The new stream was secretly spreading, but at least it seemed peaceful on the surface. Maybe it was because Hengmu Liren and his army were here. It did not mean that Hengmu Liren was merciful, nor did it mean that the people of Qinghe Prefecture had lost their courage in front of the allied army of more than 100,000 people. It was because the killings had started earlier and too much blood had been shed. That was why it was peaceful. Many of the tens of thousands of miners in the iron mines by the Fuchin River were killed. Many of the followers of the new stream in the city of Yangzhou and the suburbs were also killed. All in all, Hengmu Liren killed a lot of people. There were many green trees on both sides of the straight road leading to the north outside of Yangzhou. It should have been lush and green in late spring and early summer, but it was not. Almost every tree had a dead body of a rebel hanging on it. The rotten smell made the green leaves fall one by one. It was a horrible scene. The 2 banks of the Fuchin River were also shrouded in terror. Corpses hung from the beautiful bridges. Fresh blood and indescribable fluids flowed down from those stiff feet and into the river and creek. The once incomparably clear water that had nourished the people of Qing River for countless years had already turned the color of blood and was extremely pungent. The beautiful and tranquil Qinghe Prefecture had become like this. The once bustling Yangzhou city was now filled with dead silence and depressing silence. Those nobles who could not forget their homeland from 1,000 years ago and wanted to leave the Tang Empire, would they regret their decision when they saw the current scene? Even if they did, there was nothing they could do. Qinghe Prefecture had been completely controlled by the cavalrymen of the divine halls of West Hill and the army of the South Jin Kingdom. especially after Hungmu Liren showed his ruthlessness and unimaginable power. Nobody dared to betray him. A sacred sedan was moving slowly on the straight street in the city of Yangzhou. It stopped in front of the tranquil lake. Everyone who saw the sedan knelt down to show their reverence for Hao Yan. In the streets further away, more people closed their doors and windows as fast as they could for fear of being seen. Hungmu Liren stood calmly in layers of gauze. His childish face was filled with innocence. Even when he saw the dead bodies of the sinners pierced through by the wooden stakes, he remained calm. He did not care about the bloody scene at all, because he was the one who created it. He thought that since he was the son of Hao Yan, he had the right to rule the world. Anyone who dared to go against his will should die. The wind blew gently, and the gauze swayed slightly. The faint scent of flowers mixed with the faint smell of blood passed through the gauze and reached his nose. He took a deep breath. He looked innocent and intoxicated, so he looked cruel. Maybe it was because of the chilly wind, or because he took a deep breath, he suddenly coughed. His pale face flushed, and he seemed to be in pain. Have a good day at work tomorrow. Chapter 1100. Hungmu Liren raised his eyebrows. He thought of something and was no longer as calm and joyful as before. His face was distorted, and he was extremely angry, especially when he looked down. The divine robe he wore was very loose, and he could easily see his own chest when he lowered his head. Even though he was the son of Hao Yan, he was still immortal in the human world. That was why he had 2 breasts on his chest. But now he seemed to have another one, a black chest piece. This black chest piece, deeply embedded in his flesh, made him feel very disgusted. I'm going to kill you, Hungmu Liren growled. I'm going to kill you. His clear and sharp voice echoed on the surface of the lake. The cavalrymen of the divine halls and a dozen red-robed divine priests knelt down in fear and did not dare to make sound. Hungmu Liren was really angry. He thought he should have killed his way into Chang, or at least outside the city. Who could have thought that he was still in Qinghe Prefecture? He had powerful subordinates, cavalrymen of the divine halls, and 100,000 soldiers. But he was stopped by the Tangs in the south of the Verdant Canyon. It was the Verdant Canyon again. It was just like years ago. Hungmu Liren once sighed with regret. Jun Mo lost his arm, and he could no longer defend the Verdant Canyon alone. He also missed the chance to defeat the most powerful Jun Mo. Now Jun Mo was in the West Wilderness. Mr. First, Yu Lian, Chun Pippi, and Ning Ke were not here. But he was still stopped by the south of the Verdant Canyon. On the fields in the north of Qinghe Prefecture, the Divine Hall's coalition army of West Hill and the Southern Army of Tang had been fighting for dozens of days. Both sides had their own victories and defeats. Hungmu finally joined the battle himself, but he was ambushed by the academy and was badly injured. Those sighs seemed to have become slaps on his face. Every time Hungmu thought of it, he would feel pain on his face, and then he would go crazy in extreme pain. How could a few ants in the see-through state stop me? Hungmu Liren lowered his head and looked at the black chess piece. His slightly twisted eyebrows were full of disgust. His voice came from his teeth and was extremely cold. He closed his eyes and took another deep breath. The gauze around the divine sedan began to dance crazily. The wind blew and the air above the lake was all sucked into his chest. His chest rose slightly, and his divine robe fluttered in the wind. This time, he did not cough. A power that did not belong to the human world came to the human world and entered his body. With a muffled thud, the black chess piece embedded in his chest instantly shattered into countless pieces. He opened his eyes and looked in the direction of the Verdant Canyon. There was only killing intent in his eyes. His injuries had healed, so it was time for those people to die. Ever since the rebellion in Qinghe County, the Verdant Canyon had become the Real National Gate for the Tang Empire and the Academy. Because the South had all belonged to Taoism, it was a place that had to be guarded. A few years ago, when the whole world attacked the Tang Empire used a trick that had been hidden for hundreds of years. Professor Huang He and the array tactical master of the Imperial Court worked together to activate the big array in the Verdant Canyon at the cost of their own cultivation, directly burying countless enemies and powerhouses. In the following years, the Tang Empire began to reopen the road in the Verdant Canyon. Sealing the Verdant Canyon might be a simple way to keep the enemy outside the National Gate. But what the Tang Empire wanted to do was to fight their way out of the Verdant Canyon, defeat all the enemies, and recover the lost land. However, under the pressure of the West Hill Divine Palace Coalition Army, especially the threat of Hongmu Liren, the Southern Battlefront Army and the Yulin Royal Guards who were guarding the throat of the Tang Empire in the south did not make any arrangements for the south. They silently guarded the Verdant Canyon, using the terrain and distance as weapons to keep the powerful enemies outside the Verdant Canyon. The Tang army was a bit tired after fighting for dozens of days. The barracks hidden deep in the canyon became quieter. Only one barracks was a bit special. It was already late at night, but it was still very lively. Someone was quarreling. As I said before, I am definitely the best chess player in the world. Younger brother, how can you be my opponent? But you just won't admit defeat. You've been playing with me for so many years. Aren't you tired? Senior brother, if you were talking about something else, I would have tolerated it. However, I definitely won't tolerate this kind of thing. We've clearly played 492 games of chess over the years, and I've won one more than you. Why am I not a match for you? That game is triplet disaster. How can I lose? According to the rules I've learned since I was a child, I win and you lose. Bah. Anyway, you're not as good as me in chess. Why? Because Hamu broke into the chess array by mistake a few days ago. It was my black chess piece that hurt him, not your white chess piece. If it weren't for my white chess piece, how could I trap him? What about the previous years? Don't forget that I was the one who blocked Xiong Chomo. Bah, if it weren't for third sister, you would have been dead. In the dim barracks, Su Jiaolin lowered his head and concentrated on decocting the medicine, as if he did not hear the conversation. He was tired of listening to these people quarreling these days. The fifth brother of the academy, Song Qian, looked at the stubborn eighth brother and could not control his anger. Unexpectedly, there were two more angry voices coming from his side. Beigong Weiyong raised his bandaged hand, as if he was showing off or demonstrating. He shouted, "If it weren't for me blocking the cavalrymen of Divine Hall, your stupid array would have been broken. How could you trap him, Will? And me? Don't forget me." Shimon Buhua also raised his bandaged hand to remind them. Then he looked at the fifth brother and the eighth brother and sneered, "Don't forget that this is the second time we've guarded the Verdant Canyon. In terms of rank, you're ahead of us. In terms of contribution, don't even think about being ahead of us." No one would listen to him, especially when he said it so harshly that it aroused the competitiveness of the senior brothers. For a moment, the barracks was filled with spittle and dirty words. It was so noisy. All right. Stop quarreling. Take your medicine first." Wang Qi walked over and stopped the four from continuing to be childish. Only when the lights were brighter could they see clearly that the four of them were lying on the bed, their bodies wrapped in bandages. The smell of medicine and blood was everywhere. It was unknown how severe their injuries were, but it was obvious that they no longer had the strength to fight. After drinking the smelly medicine made by the junior brother, the room became much quieter. After a long time, Beigong Weiyong suddenly asked, "11th, can your poison stop him?" It was quiet again for a long time. Wang Qi shook his head. "I've never heard that a grand cultivator who had surpassed the 5 states could be poisoned to death." Song Qian's expression was a little indifferent. "Hamu has surpassed the 5 states. If he hadn't underestimated us, no one would have been able to stop him with the help of the remaining array intent in the Verdant Canyon." The atmosphere in the room became much more depressing. The previous excitement and the recent excitement all came from their complacency. They were very complacent. A grand cultivator like Hongmu, who had surpassed the 5 states, was defeated by them. However, Hongmu's injury would eventually recover. What should they do next? The situation of the war had changed. Hongmu could not step into the same river. Who could stop such a powerful cultivator? If they could not stop him, how could the Tang Empire defend this country? Wang Qi suddenly said softly, "Looking at the days, the things in the north should be over." Shimon Buhua frowned and said, "Although senior sister had planned this, the Golden Tribe is so powerful. How could they be defeated in such a short time?" I don't have much hope. I don't care. Beigong Weiyong was a little annoyed and said, for useless cripples in 11th, the flower addict. How can we fight them? If Ning K doesn't come, I won't care anymore. Wang Qi was a little unhappy and said, the flower addict is a woman. Senior brother, don't talk nonsense. Shimen Buhua was a little unhappy and said, how can you throw everything to youngest brother? Beigong Weiyong covered his head with a quilt and said in a low voice, I want to throw it to eldest brother, second brother, and third sister, but they have to come. Anyway, I can't beat Hengmu. The oil lamp dimmed again because of this sentence. In the ambush of the Verdant Canyon, the 4 disciples of the academy had used all their skills and used the array intent left by their predecessors. They had all the advantages, but they could only hurt Hengmu and were seriously injured. If Hengmu did not underestimate them, if they did not have those conditions, they could not think of any way to defeat him. Every time they thought of the scene where Hengmu broke the array by force with his majestic power, they would be silent and vigilant. Then they would feel uneasy and fearful. Su Jialuan finished the second batch of medicine and walked to the bedside. He gently pulled the corner of the quilt. The little attendant had become a real young man with delicate features. Beigong Weiyong lifted the quilt and was a little annoyed. He said, what's the use of drinking medicine every day? What's the use of not drinking medicine? Su Jialuan looked at him and said seriously, young master said that if nothing works, then do you still do it or not? Of course you still have to do it, because it's only possible if you do it. It's impossible if you don't do it. The room suddenly became quiet. The previously oppressive and even somewhat despairing atmosphere was immediately diluted by these words. With the help of Wang Qi, Beigong Weiyong sat up with difficulty. He took the bowl of medicine and gulped it down. Song Xian and the other 2 also drank the medicine as fast as they could. They had to recover as soon as possible. Even if they could not beat Hengmu, they had to use more strength to make Hengmu use more strength. In the early morning, the mist gradually dissipated and the morning light shone on the verdant canyon. A horse came from the north. In the quiet valley, the sound of hooves was very clear. The Tang soldiers on duty at night peeped out from behind the seemingly simple but actually strong arrow mounts. They did not draw their bows vigilantly, because they could see clearly that the horse came from the north. The horse was in black, and the people were also dressed in black. They were Ning Ke and the big black horse. Ning Ke's black academy uniform was full of dust. The big black horse's fat, which had been raised in the quagmire for several years, quickly disappeared in the galloping of thousands of miles. Now it looked especially strong and tired. From the city of Wei to the verdant canyon, thousands of miles away, and the big black horse did not really rest. They only took a nap after drinking a pot of porridge when they passed by Yang Erxie's house. As time went by, the academy was no longer a mysterious place that connected the world with the outside world. Through the propaganda of the imperial court and the narration of blabbermouths like Beigong in the military camp, the image of Ning Ke, his weapons, and his horse were all discussed enthusiastically by the Tangs. At this time, looking at the obviously extraordinary big black horse in the valley and looking at the iron arrows and knives on his body, someone quickly guessed his identity and quickly spread the news. On both sides of the verdant valley, behind the hidden arrow mounds, more and more Tang soldiers stood up and looked at Ning Ke in the valley. Some of them got up in a hurry and kept rubbing their eyes and yawning. Mr. 13 finally arrived. On the steep cliff, the voices of the Tang army gradually gathered together and turned into excited cheers. Along the way, tens of thousands of the Yulin Royal Guards and the Southern Battlefront Army cheered sincerely, and some brave soldiers greeted loudly. Ning Ke looked up at both sides of the valley and smiled and waved to say hello. So the cheers and cheers in the verdant canyon suddenly became louder, as if they were going to break through the morning sky and shake Hao Yan's divine kingdom. Finally, they reached the exit of the verdant canyon. Ning Ke pulled the reins, and the big black horse stopped moving forward. The verdant canyon narrowed into a gap that was several feet wide. Looking out from the gorge, one could see the fertile fields in the north of Qinghai Prefecture. It was late spring and early summer, and everything was green as far as the eye could see. There were many old and fresh traces of war inside and outside the canyon. There were a lot of black blood stains, broken arrows, and dense arrow scratches on the exposed stone walls, indicating the intensity of the battle. This was the gate of the Tang Empire. The war a few years ago and the war this year, the battlefield that determined the safety of Chong, and had always been here in the Verdant Canyon. Ning Ke had entered the Verdant Canyon several times, and today he came again. He stood in the canyon and looked out. No one knew what he was thinking. Wang Jinglu appeared beside him and looked to the south with him. Wang Jinglu looked very serious and did not try to hide the killing intent in his eyes. "You must kill Hengmu." Ning Ke was silent for a moment and then said, "Of course." After being driven out of Chong by Master Yen Sei and joining the army to follow Su Shi, Wang Jinglu had lost a lot of weight. Now he was even thinner and looked like a withered branch, which surprised Ning Quebec. "You have already broken the threshold of the knowing destiny state." "Why?" Wang Jinglu thought of the massacre in Qinghe Prefecture that night. He thought of the brave young men from the clans he had worked hard to gather, but before they had time to mature, they became fruits falling from the branches and smashed into pieces. His face became a little ugly, and he said, "Grief makes people mature and also makes people afraid." Ning Ke turned to look at him and asked, "Are you afraid?" "Yes." Wang Jinglu was silent for a moment and said, "You have never met Hengmu, so you don't know how powerful he is." "I know, so I'm very afraid." Ning Ke looked to the south again and said with a smile, "And you want me to kill him?" "It has been very hard recently. I will tell you the reason in a few days. I am in good health. It is purely because of work that my butt hurts from sitting. The massage in the afternoon was not very good. I will feel much better after my wife comes to beat me next week. Haha, I am so cheap. Anyone who is not satisfied can come and beat me." Chapter 1101. Wang Jinglu said, "Though he's powerful, I can help you locate him. Just like what we've discussed before, you can shoot him. If you can't kill him with one arrow, shoot a few more." Ning Ke shook his head and said, "You'll die. I'm not afraid of death. I should have died when Master Yen Sei wrote the Well Talisman in Chong. I should have died when Xiong Chumo killed General Su Shi. I should have died when the entire Qinghe Prefecture was bathed in blood that night." Wang Jinglu looked to the south and said, "As long as I can kill him, I can die many times." Ning Ke was silent for a while and said, "He's not worth it." After saying this, he got off the horse and let go of the reins to let the big black horse rest. Then he followed Wang Jinglu to a military post deep in the side of the gorge. Walking into the barracks, before he had the time to greet his 5 senior brothers, he was greeted by a burst of mournful cries. Beigong Weiyang pointed at him with a trembling finger. His lips were also trembling. He cried in grief and anger, "Why did you come so late? Why did you come so late?" It was painful to cry without a voice. He said it so clearly, but there were no tears on his face. Of course, he was faking it. Ning Ke said angrily, "My butt almost split into 2 halves, and you think it's not fast enough?" Beigong Weiyang was seen through by him, but he was not embarrassed at all. He scolded angrily, "You guys who only know how to fight, just play in the north and west. Most importantly, you leave this place to us scholars. You're so shameless. Anyway, I don't care. We've suffered a great loss. You have to avenge us." Ning Ke looked at his 4 senior brothers who were seriously injured in bed and said helplessly, "How do you want to avenge us?" Before Beigong said anything, 5th brother Song Qian said coldly, "Of course we have to kill him." Ning Ke glanced at Wang Jinglu subconsciously and asked confusedly, "The military summary I received said that my senior brothers performed well on the battlefield and successfully killed Hengmu. Why do I feel that you guys suffered a loss?" Beigong Weiyang said angrily, "You and 3rd sister were the ones who designed the array and the plan. Don't you know the details? But even so, we didn't manage to kill him. Instead, we were beaten into a pig's head. No matter how you look at it, it's a disgrace to the academy. Of course, we suffered a great loss. Little brother, You must get back at us. Ning Ke took the ginseng soup from Wang Qi and drank it in one gulp. Suddenly, he felt much more energetic. He took the hot towel from Su Jiaowen and wiped his face. He looked at the crowd and asked. Wang Jinglu said that he wanted to kill him, and now senior brothers also say that they want to kill him. Of course, we will kill him, but why are you so obsessed with him? Moreover, it's fine to kill him, but you also said that he's not easy to kill. What are you trying to say? Beigong Weiyang praised. Although the rhyme is extremely boring, it is still rhyming. Ning Ke ignored him and threw the towel back to Su Jiaowen. He said, boost the morale of others and diminish our own. What exactly do you want to do? Can you just say it? Song Qian was the highest in the room. Everyone looked at him. He said seriously, I'm saying this to remind you to be careful. Hengmu is too strong. Maybe we should defend for a while. The Verdant Canyon is naturally easy to defend. With our tactical array and poison, we should be able to hold on until senior brother arrives. He suddenly thought of something very important. What about senior sister? She's injured and needs some time to recover. Ning Ke said, as for defending, I don't agree. This is not the original plan. Senior sister won't agree either. The Golden Tribe Royal Court is indeed powerful. Senior sister is indeed injured. If she came with you, I would have no objection. We should attack Yangzhou, but not now. Why not? We have to go south eventually. Seeing that Ning Ke did not change his mind, Beigong Weiyang clapped his hands and laughed. He said, I knew that little brother wouldn't agree. We still have to solve the problem of killing Hengmu. Ning Ke said, I have never opposed this. Song Qian said, the key is how to kill him. Now it seems that the most reliable and safest way is to use the primordial 13 arrows and let Wang Jinglu be the bait. Wang Jinglu took a step forward with a smile on his face. Song Qian stood up with the help of Wang Qi and walked to Ning Quebec. He said, if Wang Jinglu can't do it, then it's our turn. We'll use the tactical array to force him to show his state. Ning Ke was silent for a long time. He said, you've been talking about how powerful Hengmu is. Are you trying to convince me to accept your arrangement? Song Qian was as thick-skinned as all the people in the back of the mountain of the academy. He said calmly, Hengmu is powerful. Our arrangement is not bad either. Beigong Weiyang saw that the atmosphere was a little depressing. He praised again, the rhyme is also very accurate. Ning Ke did not think and said directly, I don't agree. Song Qian and the other brothers looked at each other and sighed. We are worried that you won't agree. That's why we put on this show. Why can't you understand our intention? Beigong Weiyang was about to say something when Ning Ke glared at him and said, I don't care if it's rhyme or not. If I don't agree, I don't agree. I don't agree to guard, and I don't agree to exchange your lives for Hengmu's. He looked at Wang Jinglu and said, as I said just now, he doesn't deserve it. Everyone was silent. They did not know what to do since their well-planned advertising campaign did not work. Song Qian asked worriedly, then how do we kill Hengmu? Ning Ke said, how do we kill a person? Of course we kill him. It sounded like nonsense, but it was still nonsense when one thought about it. However, it was often this kind of nonsense that represented the absolute truth in the world. For example, how to love a person. Of course, it was to love her. He has already surpassed the 5 states. Song Qian thought of the majestic power that fell from the sky that day. His expression became more and more serious. He looked at Ning Ke and said, I know you are good at fighting, but how do you make up for the gap between states? The Abbey Dean has entered a state of tranquility. For thousands of years, only the headmaster and uncle master are stronger than him. However, eldest brother and third sister can fight him together. I can use Chong and to cut him into a coma. Lotus is on the threshold of the 5 states. His state is mysterious and unpredictable. Shan Shan, Yi Hong Yu, and I are at the beginning of knowing destiny state, the upper part of see-through state, and the last one is at the beginning of see-through state. However, we can defeat him and turn him into ashes. Cultivators are chopped into minced meat by ordinary people. Masters are beaten into dust by ordinary people. I shot Longqing into an idiot with 1 arrow. The headmaster has gone to the Divine Kingdom to fight with Hao Ian until now. Fighting is related to states, but it also has nothing to do with them. Do we really need to make up for the gap between states? I don't think so. I don't think Hingmu will either. Ning Ke said 3 sentences in a row. His expression was calm and his tone was firm. After he finished, he saw that his senior brothers did not say anything else. He turned around and walked out of the military station. Looking at his back, Song Qian and the others did not say anything. They only shook their heads after he left the military station. Beigong Weiyong looked at the crowd and said in a heavy tone, "Youngest brother was strange today. In the past, he always did what he wanted to do first. He never talked so much like he did today." Song Qian thought for a while and said, "Youngest brother was explaining to us and to himself. It seems that he does not have much confidence in facing Hongmu." Hearing this, the military station became even quieter. No one spoke for a long time. Wang Jinglu followed Ning Ke out of the barracks and walked toward the central military tent. After walking for about half a mile, he could not help but ask, "Are you not confident?" His thoughts were similar to the senior brothers of the academy in the military station. If Ning Ke really had the confidence to defeat Hingmu, he would not have to explain so much. Perhaps it was not an explanation, but there must be something. Ning Ke was a little surprised. He stopped and turned around to ask, "What confidence?" Wang Jinglu was silent for a while and said, "The confidence to defeat Hongmu." Ning Ke raised his eyebrows slightly and thought for a while before he understood what Wang Jinglu meant. He smiled helplessly and said, "Those words were for the senior brothers. I don't want them to do those stupid things with you." Wang Jinglu said, "Sacrifice does not mean stupidity." Ning Ke said, "Unnecessary sacrifice is stupidity." Wang Jinglu asked, "Then how are you going to defeat Hingmu?" Ning Ke said, "If I kill him, I will naturally defeat him." This was still nonsense. Just like how he answered how to defeat Hongmu in the military station, it was almost the same boring but always correct logic. This did not convince Wang Jinglu. He stared at Ning Ke's eyes and asked persistently, "How do I kill him?" Ning Ke smiled and asked, "Do you want to know?" Wang Jinglu nodded and looked very determined. Ning Ke turned around and walked toward the central military tent of the Southern Army. His words echoed in the verdant canyon. "When I kill him, you will know how to kill him." Song Qian and the other disciples of the academy and Wang Jinglu insisted. The commanders of the Southern Army and the Yulin Royal Guards also insisted that the best way to defeat Hongmu was to make a corresponding sacrifice and use the primordial 13 arrows. However, Ning Ke still opposed it. When others opposed his opinion, he would continue to oppose it. He was the youngest brother of the academy. According to the sequence, he was not very high. However, he was the de facto leader of the academy. As for the Tang Empire, they all followed his lead. Therefore, his insistence was very powerful. No matter what Song Qian and the other Tang generals thought, they still had to follow his orders. The next morning, the Tang army left the verdant canyon in the south and came to the fertile field in the north of Qinga County. This was the first time that the Tang army set foot on this land since the rebellion of the warlords in Qinga County. The morning light was beautiful and the morning breeze was pleasant. The military flag danced in the wind and looked fresh in the light. The news of the fall of the Golden Tribe Royal Court was told by Ning Ke to the generals. Coupled with his deliberate action, the news quickly spread among the army. The strong enemy in the north that had been entrenched for many years suddenly became a mirage. The morale of the Tang army was greatly boosted. Looking at the former territory, they only felt magnificent. Even the generals and cultivators who were worried about Hongmu felt refreshed at this moment. It was not because they saw the legendary scenery, but because they came to this beautiful scenery. The Tangs would eventually take back what belonged to them. Walking out of the verdant canyon was the first step in this process. All they needed to do was to be more stable. The 40,000 cavalrymen of the Southern Battlefront Army and the Yulin Royal Guards, together with a larger number of experienced infantry, formed a mighty army. They swarmed out of the verdant canyon and spread across the fields toward the south. They did not encounter any strong resistance along the way. The armed forces of the warlords hiding in the towns and villages melted like ice under the sun in front of the Tang army. They could not even slow down the Tang army southward, let alone stop them. The rumored beautiful bridges, rivers, and gardens in spring appeared in front of the 100,000 Tang soldiers. They enjoyed it silently and calmly, but soon they could no longer maintain this mood. There were dead people everywhere. Between the bridges and the gardens in spring, there were hanged people everywhere. At least thousands of bodies were hanging on the treetops, on the bridges, and at the gates of the gardens. Some of the bodies were already rotten, while some were still glaring with anger. The once quiet and beautiful homes in the south of the Tang Empire seemed to have become a huge graveyard. From the verdant canyon to the city of Yangzhou, there were such miserable scenes everywhere. The Tang army could no longer be happy as they broke through the cities and towns one after another. Their expressions were extremely solemn, and their footsteps became more and more hurried. They knew very well that the dead hanging in Qinghe County must be their compatriots. Yes, Qinghe County had betrayed the Tang Empire a few years ago, but there were still many people living here who cherished Chang, and especially those young people. As long as they cherished the Tang Empire, they were Tangs and compatriots. The Tang army marched silently and hurried south. They did not release the hanged dead, nor did they pay more attention to them. There was no mourning ceremony, because they knew that they had to reach the city of Yangzhou as soon as possible and drive the West Hill Divine Palace and the South Jin Kingdom out of this territory. Only then could they truly comfort the dead. It was another early morning. The Tang army appeared at the foot of the city of Yangzhou. Countless military flags fluttered in the morning wind. The war horses neighed softly and the blades were unsheathed. A murderous aura rushed toward the ancient city. The city of Yangzhou was in chaos. When the Tang army left the verdant canyon, the warlords and bigwigs of the West Hill Divine Palace had received the news. But no one had expected that the Tang army would come so quickly. Yangzhou was a big city. Even compared to the entire Tang Empire, it could be ranked in the top 5. It was extremely difficult to conquer. The Tang army did not take advantage of the momentum to attack the city. The generals of the Southern Army and the Yulin Royal Guards forcibly controlled the emotions of the soldiers. They began to set up camp on a large, gentle slope 10 miles north of the city. For a moment, the sound of pounding earth could be heard everywhere. A Tang soldier was smashing a wooden pile. Hearing the sound coming from afar, he looked up and saw that the city gate of Yangzhou was slowly opening. A dense mass of cavalry surged out like a tide. My mood is terrible. It was caused by ice dregs of the butterfly forest and other B** cheese. I might stop writing for a day tomorrow. Think about it. The day after tomorrow, I will recover. And the day after tomorrow, I will start to explode. Damn, I want to defeat these B** cheese. Chapter 11:02. Yesterday, I mentioned that I might have to take a day off to think about it. That's right, there was no update today. Due to his health, he hadn't written much in the past half a year. After he resumed updating, his monthly votes had become sticky and unrefreshing. It was because he was embarrassed and felt that it wasn't appropriate to ask for votes as soon as he updated. But today was great. There was no update today. Finally, I got the chance. I strongly, seriously, and sincerely call for everyone to vote for Shogun. There weren't many chances to vote for the Nighthawk. Time waits for no man. Once lost, never come again. Tonight, we need everyone's monthly tickets. Everyone needs to vote for General Knight, too. Let's be one. Monthly votes. Thank you. Chapter 11:03. The Tang army soon calmed down after a short commotion. They set up the tents, and the battle array was ready. From the generals to the soldiers, they all knew that the Taoist coalition army came out of the city to cooperate with the defense, not because they had the guts to attack the Tang army before they had a firm foothold. The Tang army was still confident, but they were not less vigilant. More and more reports came from Yangzhou. The divine halls of West Hill had sent more divine priests to the coalition army. The Imperial Center Administration and the tactical array masters in the Tang army might be able to resist the divine priest's divine skills. But who could stop Liren? The young and legendary great divine priest of West Hill had recovered from his wounds a few days ago. A super powerful figure like him was powerful enough to decide the outcome of the war. If no one could stop him, he could easily wipe out the cultivators in the Tang army with the help of the cavalrymen of the divine halls. As long as he killed all the tactical array masters and talisman masters, the cavalrymen of the divine halls would launch a surprise attack. How could the Tang army defeat them? Today, when the Tang army was approaching, the lords of the aristocratic families and the generals of the South Jin Kingdom on the city wall of Yangzhou were calm and orderly. Obviously, they knew that as long as Liren was here, the coalition army would never lose and Yangzhou would never fall. Then there was nothing to worry about. In front of the central tent of the Tang army, dozens of cavalrymen were standing on the meadow and looking at the direction of Yangzhou. In fact, those generals were all looking at Ning Quebec. It seemed that the key to the war was the battle between him and Hengmu. Nobody believed that Ning Ke could kill Liren. Even though he was Mr. 13 of the academy and had an unimaginably high position in the hearts of the Tang army and people, the killer was Liren, the son of Haoyin. They only hoped that Ning Ke could defeat or even stall Liren, so that Liren would not affect the battle before the Tang cavalry was sure of the victory. Ning Ke seemed to be unaware of their gazes. He quietly looked at the city of Yangzhou, the fields outside the city, the official road between the fields, and the green trees on both sides of the road. Perhaps it was because Liren did not want his view to be obstructed. The corpses of the followers of the new stream and the young people who were loyal to the old Tang were not hung in the fields. Because of the war and the purge, the farmers were not in the mood to farm, so the fields were abandoned. There were no seedlings in front of the city of Yangzhou, only weeds and wildflowers. Ninkei could not remember if it was late spring or early summer. Looking at the flowers and the smoke and feeling the wild prosperity, he suddenly thought of a saying. Fireworks in Yangzhou in March. He murmured. Song Qian and the others were severely injured by Liren. They could not stand up no matter how much medicine they took. They were left in the verdant canyon to recover. Wang Qi was the only disciple of the academy who followed Ning Ke to the battlefield today. Wang Qi shook his head and said, "The flowering season is already the 5th month." Ning Ke recalled that it was snowing when he left Chang'an. Time passed too fast. He could not help but sigh and said, "I don't have the energy to remember these things." Time was the most important thing. But he had to go to the wilderness in the north and the Qinghe River in the south. He had to kill many difficult people and make many difficult decisions. Those things seemed to be more important than time. 11th brother, I'll go first. Ning Ke said to Wang Qi. Wang Qi looked at him worriedly and said, "Don't force yourself if you can't succeed." Ning Ke smiled and lifted the reins. The big black horse slowly lifted its hooves and trod on the fertile fields. Along the way, the weeds were bent and the wildflowers were broken. It was heading toward the city of Yangzhou. A single rider arrived at Yangzhou City, attracting dozens of sparse arrows. The big black horse looked at the enemies on the city wall with an indifferent expression. It probably thought it was boring. Ning Ke did not dodge and watched the arrows fall on the field in front. Someone looked at the handsome black horse and the man dressed in a black academy uniform on its back and finally remembered the descriptions and the rumors. He immediately lost his head in panic and shouted loudly, "Ning Ke, Mr. 13, the academy is here." Recognizing Ning Ke, the people on the city wall of Yangzhou were in an uproar. There were people moving everywhere, and the sound of heavy shields moving was deafening. The prideful red-robed clerics instantly paled. They waved their arms and screamed, "Quickly report this to the divine seat." Bai Haixin had died in front of the Verdant Canyon a few years ago. The current commander-in-chief of the South Jin Kingdom was his brother-in-law, Dong Wei. Dong Wei, who was usually calm and confident in front of his subordinates, had already hidden behind 3 layers of shields. Looking at the iron bow on Ning Ke's shoulder, his body trembled uncontrollably, and his voice trembled violently. "Mr. 13, please wait. The great divine priest will be here soon." The entire human world knew how powerful and terrifying Ning Ke was. Just like how the Tangs were worried about Hongmu Liren, Ning Ke's name was also a terrifying deterrent to the enemies of the Tang Empire. Fortunately, the iron bow was resting on his shoulder quietly. Otherwise, Dong Wei and the priests in red would not even dare to shout. Even if they could shout, they would not shout for a fight. They would just say that the great divine priest would be here soon and that they should wait for a moment. For the people in the human world, powerful cultivators like Ning Ke and Hongmu were no different from immortals. Since there's going to be a fight between immortals today, why would they, as immortals, bring about their own destruction? The news that Ning Ke had arrived at the city of Yangzhou reached Hongmu Liren's ears in the shortest time possible. His innocent face revealed a sincere smile, and he said with relief, "Finally, you are here." A priest was reporting the latest military intelligence to the divine halls in a low voice. He told the divine halls of West Hill about the collapse of the Golden Tribe Royal Court and how Ning Ke defeated 10,000 cavalries in the city of Wei with one arrow. Then he begged the great divine priest with a trembling voice not to underestimate the enemy. Hongmu Liren laughed innocently and satisfyingly. He murmured, "So what if he is powerful? He is just a mortal after all, while I am the real son of God." Yes, he thought that he was the real son of West Hill, and Long Qing was not qualified to be mentioned in the same breath with him. If it were not for Long Qing's silence, he would have made Long Qing the only one in the world. "Ning Ke, I will meet you outside the city." Hongmu Liren looked to the north and said slowly. His childish voice condensed into a beam and stirred up the layers of gauze in front of the sedan. It flew over 10 miles and exploded in the fields outside the city like thunder in spring. Boom! Many soldiers on the city of Yangzhou almost fainted because of the thunder. They managed to hold their bodies and not fall down. When they came to their senses, they were all cheering. The great divine priest's casual words were like the power of heaven. His state was way beyond the human realm. No matter how powerful Mr. 13 from the Academy was, how could he defeat the great divine priest? Ning Ke lowered his head and looked at the wildflowers in the fields calmly. The big black horse lowered its head and chewed on a wildflower. It did not taste good and spat it out, as if it did not hear the thunder at all. "Meet me outside the city." He looked up at the city of Yangzhou and said, "I am the owner of this place. I can meet you however I want." He did not use the Great Spirit on purpose. He just said it normally, so his words were not as powerful as Hongmu Liren's. But he knew that Hongmu Liren could hear him. After that, he took out a handful of meatballs and stuffed them into the big black horse's mouth. The big black horse did not dare to disobey. It chewed the meatballs with a bitter face and swallowed them as fast as it could. Then it lowered its head and chewed on the grass with dew on it so that it would not be affected by the smell. The meatballs were concocted by Wang Qi. They were very effective but tasteless. Ning Ke also ate a handful of meatballs. He looked at the cavalrymen of the divine halls of West Hill and the South Jin Kingdom below the city of Yangzhou. He stroked the big black horse's hair and said, "You came from the Southern Battlefront Army and left the military ministry because I chose you outside the academy. You should be a war horse no matter how I look at it." The big black horse nodded in agreement. He said, "You and I have been to many places and fought against many enemies. But in fact, we have never been to a real battlefield. I came from a cavalryman, and you came from a war horse. Don't you feel regretful?" The big black horse wanted to say that he did not feel regretful, but he did not dare to. Moreover, he could feel the effects of the meatballs spreading in his body. He felt that his blood was heating up, and he wanted to sprint wildly. Was this the feeling of being hot-blooded? He remembered the last time he had such a feeling and impulse. It was many years ago when he saw the coquettish and beautiful big white mare in the Left King's Palace racing competition in the wilderness. The big black horse's breathing became rough and rapid, and it kept breathing out hot air. Ning Ke untied the iron bow and casually pulled it to the fullest. He aimed in the direction of Yangzhou City. There were countless pairs of eyes watching him from above and below the city walls. Even if it was the slightest movement, at least half of them were probably staring at his shoulder at the dark iron bow. When he pulled the iron bow and aimed at Yangzhou City, there was a sudden uproar and countless screams of panic. The leaders of the clans and the generals of the coalition army knew the terror of the primordial 13 arrows the best. They were the most vigilant and watched closely. Therefore, they reacted the fastest. Countless swishing sounds could be heard. Countless people hugged their heads and squatted down. They looked like weeds that had been blown down by the wind. Of course, the weeds were not strong. The cavalrymen in front of the city gate felt like they were falling into the abyss of death, even though they were only being pointed at by the arrowhead. Some of them desperately whipped their mounts. Some were so distracted that they forgot to move and let their mounts drag them to the side. In a short period of time, there was a large empty space. There was nothing between Ning Kei's arrow and the gate of Yangzhou. There was nothing to block it. He released the bowstring. He did not use the primordial 13 arrows, but an ordinary arrow. With a swoosh, the arrow landed on the city gate of Yangzhou City that had been built for less than 2 years. The gate was extremely thick. The sharp arrowhead penetrated half a foot into the gate, but it still could not penetrate it. The arrow seemed to have lost its momentum and stopped moving forward. It began to vibrate violently. The tail of the arrow rubbed against the air at a high speed, producing a dull and frightening buzzing sound. The arrow pierced deeply into the thick city gate. As it vibrated at such a terrifying speed, the place where it touched began to soften. In the next moment, there was even a thin crack. At the moment when the arrow fell on the city gate, Ning Kei moved. An arrogant neigh tore through the quiet sky outside Yangzhou City. The big black horse did not stand on its hind legs. It lowered its head and stomped its hind hooves on the ground. The soft field was shaken by its stomps, causing 2 extremely exaggerated muddy rains and a large cloud of dust. The muddy rain and dust continued to rise, covering the eyes of the Tang army. When the dust settled and they looked at the field again, they found that the big black horse was already 1,000 feet away. 1,000 feet away in an instant. What a terrifying speed. Looking at the straight line of dust in the field and the big black horse sprinting at the front like lightning, everyone was silent. Yangzhou City was close. A cavalry commander of the West Hill Divine Hall shouted and tried to stop it with a talisman knife in his hand. Ning Kei did not even look at him, and neither did the big black horse. The shout turned into a scream. The cavalry commander was shaken into the sky. Blood gushed out from his neck and the depths of his armor. It was a rain of blood. Yangzhou City was closer. A sword master from the South Jin Kingdom pulled out his sword and wanted to launch a sneak attack. Although he was not a disciple of the Sword Garret, he had learned some sword style from the Sword Garret. He was particular about a foot in front of the body, so he held his sword tightly. He wanted to use his sword at the most powerful moment. The big black horse crashed into his body. The sword master from the South Jin Kingdom did not have time to draw his sword because the big black horse was too fast. It was so fast that it was beyond his imagination and all his calculations. It was even several times faster than his sword. A foot in front of the body, his sword was knocked back by the big black horse just as he was unsheathed. With a swish, the sword master from the South Jin Kingdom's body was cut in half. He was cut in half by his own sword. The big black horse rushed into the 100,000 cavalrymen with a violent cloud of dust. It was so duty-bound, righteous, and fearless, because its blood was hot. Of course, if it had not taken those pills, it might not have been so resolute. The cloud of dust was straight, and the black lightning lit up the entire field. In front of that straight line, countless figures were shaken into the sky. Bang, bang, bang. The hard armor was deflated. Boom, boom, boom. The sharp swords and knives were broken. Yangzhou was really close. The Allied cavalry finally organized an effective defensive formation. Several long spears were pointed at the front. The sharp and poisonous spear tips shone with a chilling luster under the sunlight. Ning Kei stared at the arrow that was still shaking violently on the city gate and said, rise. The big black horse neighed and leaped into the sky. Tom seemed to stop at this moment. On the horse's back, Ninkei punched the tail of the arrow. Countless cracks appeared on the thick city gate in an instant, densely packed like a spider web. Crack, 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 crack. The city gate collapsed. The big black horse landed, lighter than a swallow. Several terrifying spears had already been left behind. It did not slow down and continued to rush forward like a black ghost. They entered Yangzhou. I wrote for the whole day today and only wrote 4,000 words. I almost threw up. Mom was shocked when she heard the sound of me retching. She thought something was wrong with me. Actually, my body is fine. It's all mental problems. Is my writing so bad that I feel like throwing up while writing? I really want to curse. I thought I would have to write about life and family relationships with Hingmu today, so I'll leave it for tomorrow. I hope I can write more tomorrow. Anyway, I'm talking about recovering today and breaking out tomorrow. If I can't break out tomorrow, well, I'll tell everyone who the culprit is. Chapter 1104. Countless pairs of eyes watched the big black horse break into the enemy's camp like lightning and then enter Yangzhou like a wisp of smoke. There were the Tang army, bigwigs from the warlords in the city, the dead in the Fuchin River, and the dead hanging on the trees on the bridge. Many of them died with their eyes wide open. They finally closed their eyes when they saw Ning, Quebec. There was a long straight road behind the city gate of Yangzhou. The big black horse galloped southward and traveled a few miles in an instant. The sound of hooves slowed down. That was Ning Kei's reply to the dead in Qinghe Prefecture. In the middle of the street, thousands of feet away, there was a huge sacred sedan. The gauze curtain was fluttering in the warm spring breeze, revealing the face of the young, great divine priest. He was still calm with a cruel smile. "You are in such a hurry. It seems that the wind and thunder are unstoppable, but I think it is not the demeanor of the academy." Hengmu Liren looked at him and said. Ning Kei got off the horse and did not answer. He reached his right hand behind his shoulder and held the hilt of his blade. He walked toward the sacred sedan. It was thousands of feet away from the sacred sedan. It would take him 1,000 steps to walk slowly. According to your fighting style, you never give your opponent too much time to prepare. So who are you going to leave the 1,000 steps for? For yourself? It seems that you know how the battle will go. Hengmu Liren smiled with satisfaction and said, "It is not surprising that you can defeat a de easily in the wilderness, because talisman masters are naturally invincible. Moreover, you have the ability of the academy. Besides, you're also a cultivator of diabolism. You're already one of the most powerful cultivators in the cultivation world. Unfortunately, none of these means anything to me." While talking, Ning Kei had already walked dozens of steps forward. Hengmu Liren stopped smiling and stared at the approaching figure. A trace of anger flashed across his tender eyes, and he said coldly, "Talisman masters are invincible in the same state? Talisman masters below the 5 states are naturally invincible? Even so what? You should know that I have already surpassed the 5 states. How can you defeat me?" Ning Kei still did not say anything. He held the hilt and walked forward in silence. Hengmu Liren did not look down on him because of his silence. On the contrary, he looked more solemn. He leaned forward and then sat up straight. He said seriously, "Of course, I admit that you are powerful enough. Today's battle, no matter who wins, will shake the entire world just like the Battle of Verdant Canyon years ago. It will be recorded in of history. So I'm grateful that you are here." Ning of Hengmu Liren was powerful enough to show his strength, of his absolute confidence, of gratitude. But of Hengmu Liren did not agree. He felt that the battle on the street of Yangzhou today was not similar to the Battle of Verdant Canyon. He might be able to compete with Second Brother now, but Hengmu was not qualified to be mentioned in the same breath as Liu Bai. Eyes of Hengmu of Liren was of Tian of Haoyin, of heaven of. Liu Bai was the most powerful one who dared to draw his sword against Haoyin. He was the most powerful one in the world. Ning Kei remained silent. Hengmu Liren was finally displeased. His solemn expression was mixed with anger. He thought that there should be some sympathy between him and Ning Quebec. However, Ning Ke did not answer him, which made him feel ignored. Are you confident that you can defeat me? He looked at Ning Ke and said sarcastically. No. Ning Ke finally spoke. He looked at the sacred sedan and said calmly, before every battle, I am never sure that I can defeat my opponent, even if my opponent is a baby who can't cultivate. Only people like Yi Hong Yu and I can understand this mentality. So you will never defeat people like us. Hamu Liren remained silent for a while and said, Is this a man who lives to fight? Ning Ke was about 1,000 feet away from the sacred sedan. He loosened his grip on the hilt and then tightened it. Hamu Liren raised his head and stared at his face. His eyes were shining, and he said, So, do people like you know why you fight? Ning Ke raised his eyebrows and did not answer. It was meaningless. Hamu Liren stood up slowly. The gauze around the sacred sedan moved without the wind and revealed his body. He was wearing indigo robe and had a peaceful and powerful aura. A distant voice reverberated through the entire Yangzhou city, and it was proud and certain. I am the son of Haoyan. I love this world deeply. I fight for this world and for Haoyan. Therefore, I will win the eternal victory. Hearing this, Ning Ke suddenly let go of the hilt and rolled up the sleeves of his Black Academy uniform. He said, Even though I don't like such a coincidence, I have to admit that I have been fighting for her. Then he came to the front of the sacred sedan. Tens of thousands of layers of gauze were blown up by the wind and then torn into pieces. The pieces had barely started to dance when Ning Ke broke through the sedan and stood in front of Hamu Liren. Until then, the flagstones on the long street were broken into pieces. Smoke and dust were stirred up. Then the wind whistled. He exerted an unimaginable power and an unimaginable speed. He was extremely violent. Ning Ke looked at Hamu Liren. In fact, this was the first time he met Hamu Liren. They did not greet each other except for the time when they met by the Iron Arrow. He did not even see the face of this young Taoist Taoism before he punched at him. His punch was as heavy as Min Mountain. If it hit, even the sky would be cracked. No matter how powerful Hamu Liren was, he could only accept his defeat. The wind from the punch hit him. Hamu Liren's young face showed a shocked expression. He had taken Ning Ke seriously, but he did not expect Ning Ke to attack so quickly and violently. Yes, what Ning Ke wanted to do was to attack first. He wanted to use his rich fighting experience to bully this young Taoism who was in a powerful state but did not know how to fight. That was why he gave up on the saber and chose to use his fists. Only when he could control his body so perfectly could he unleash absolute speed and end all the changes before all the changes happened. Ning Ke believed that Hamu Liren might be able to do something at the last moment, but he would not be able to stop Tianqi. Therefore, he would not be able to resist Ning Ke's fist. Ning Ke's fist was as big as an earthenware bowl. With a loud boom, the streets of the city of Yangzhou exploded. It was much more terrifying than Hamu Liren's thunder-like words. The shredded gauze around the sacred sedan shot out like arrows. Hamu Liren lowered his head and looked at his chest with a mocking smile. His body was covered by a thin layer of clear light. He opened his hands and aimed at the sky. Ning Ke's fist did not manage to defeat him. It did not even manage to touch his body. The thin layer of clear light slightly caved in, like an indestructible armor, blocking the infinite power outside. Two pure flames of Haoyan's divine flame were burning in his palms. A majestic force came from the sky and poured into his body. This was the heavenly enlightenment. Ning Ke did not expect that his continuous silence as a foreshadowing, the hilt as a precondition, the momentum of his attack, and the final burst of power could be blocked by Hamu Liren with absolute speed and strength. Because he did not expect that Hamu Liren could achieve Tianqi in such a short time. He had fought with the powerful cultivators in the Tianqi state and heard from Sang Sang about Wei Guangming's Tianqi before his death. Now he realized that Hamu Liren's speed had surpassed Wei Guangming and Xiong Chumo and was almost as fast as the Abbey Dean in Chang'an. What state was he in? Hamu Liren raised his head and looked at him with a faint smile. as if he was looking at a clown or a dead man. The 5 states were a very high threshold for Taoism. Inside and outside the threshold were 2 different worlds. Tianqi was the highest state above the 5 states, but Ningke was still below it. Hengmu was already in Tianqi. How could he defeat him? Or you could try that talisman. Hengmu Liren looked at him and said so with a faint smile. Ningke had written the unimaginable talisman in Chong, but he could not do it in Yangzhou, because those who were loyal to the old Tang and those who were willing to fight with him had all been killed and hung on the bridges and trees. Ningke had prepared a lot for today's battle. So had Hengmu Liren. At this moment, there was a faint cry of cicadas at the end of the long street. Hengmu Liren was a bit shocked. Ningke remained calm. He knew that his senior sister did not come. That was the real cicadas welcoming the Empress. Only he, himself, could defeat Hengmu Liren. Back then, he wrote the talisman with the help of the entire Chong and defeated the Abbey Dean. Later, on the Peach Mountain during the Right to Light, he defeated Xiong Chumo with the help of Sang Sing. Now he had left Chong, and whether Sang Sang was in the Divine Kingdom or hiding somewhere in the human world, she was not with him. So how could he defeat Hengmu, who was a Tianqi cultivator? In fact, only a moment had passed. Ningke's fist was still on Hengmu Liren's chest. He suddenly loosened his fist and opened his palm, just like Hengmu Liren did. They were not on the Peach Mountain, so Hao Ian's power did not flow into his body. A drop of crystal clear liquid appeared in his palm. The liquid was clear and sticky. It melted in the wind and turned into a bit of qi, a bit of great spirit. The great spirit started burning fiercely in his palm, emitting endless light and heat. It looked no different from the Hao Ian's divine flame burning in Hengmu Liren's palm. It looked a bit weird. Suddenly, Ningke slapped on Hengmu Liren's chest with a backhand. Different from before, the thin and clear light that covered Hengmu Liren's body seemed to think that the Great Spirit was the same holy light and did not stop it. The burning Great Spirit poured into Hengmu's body. How could he defeat a Tianqi cultivator? Master Yinsei's method was to cut the space so that Hao Ian's power could not completely fall into the cultivator's body. Yu Yin's method was to cut the world and take the cultivator into her own world to cut off the connection between the cultivator and Hao Yin. Ningke could not do that, so he had to think of other ways. Back when he was in seclusion in the cliff cave and inherited the youngest uncle's mantle, he had been thinking about one thing. Since the Great Spirit was so similar to Hao Ian's divine flame, if he did not consider the difference between religion and divinity, would the two energies be the same? Tianqi accepted the power of Hao Ian's divine flame, so there must be a limit on the cultivator's capacity. If someone poured more power into the cultivator, would the cultivator be overwhelmed? That was his method. Hengmu Liren was in Tianqi. His body was filled with Hao Ian's divine flame. He could not stop the process, but he could pour a spoonful of oil on the fire and rain on the river that had overflowed the dam. He believed that the divine flame that he poured into Hengmu Liren's body was more than enough to cause a qualitative change. A little bit of the Great Spirit? That was the cultivation that he had been cultivating day and night for years. It seemed to be a little bit, but it was actually almost infinite. After a light pat, Ningke's face turned extremely pale. Even his cheeks looked thinner. It was not hard to imagine how much power he had lost at that moment. Hengmu Liren's face turned pale too, but it was not pale because he was weak. Instead, it was pure and holy like jade. In contrast, his pupils had occupied his entire eye sockets. They were pure and dark, extremely sacred, but with a hint of pain. The process only lasted for a short while. Dust and smoke rose up on the long street. The qi of heaven and earth above the city of Yangzhou and even further away were disturbed. Clouds were stirred up, and the sacred sedan could not hold on any longer and turned into ashes. It was as if a horrible hurricane from the storm sea in the east of the kingdom of Song had suddenly arrived here. The world turned dark, and the whistling sound was like the wailing of ghosts. The houses nearby were all turned into ruins. The dust and smoke gradually dispersed. Hengmu Liren stood still. His divine robe was torn and hot air was coming out from the cracks. His mouth and nose were extremely dry. He seemed to be about to fall, but he did not. Stupid human. He looked at Ning Ke and said coldly and disdainfully, "Is this how you came up with to kill me?" The divine flame is the power and will of Hao Yin. It is incalculable and as vast as the ocean. Where can you create another ocean? Infinite is still infinite. How can it overflow the dam? With that, he punched at Ning Quebec. His fist was burning with Hao Yin's divine flame. It left a bright and blinding flame in the dark street. It was a loud bang. Ning Ke was blown backward. Half of the houses on the street were destroyed. It was quiet. No sound could be heard. Hung Mu Liren withdrew his fist and looked at the divine flame on it. He was satisfied with his power. However, at the other end of the street, there was a small sound. Someone was pushing the wooden beams and stones away. Hung Mu Liren squinted his eyes and looked at that direction. He was surprised and confused. Ning Ke stood up in the ruins. He was covered with blood, and many bones were broken. There was a horrible wound on his chest that was punched by Hung Mu. His heart could even be vaguely seen. An ordinary person would have died from such a serious injury. No matter how strong his will was, he could not stand still. However, he stood very steadily, and the expression on his face did not change. It seems that the methods in the stories are not working. He wiped off the blood on his face and looked at Hung Mu Liren. Then I have to try my new method. It might not work, but it might work. The story that Ning Ke read was called Qing Yu Year. The method was the one that the Qing Emperor used to deal with Ku He. The new method he learned was the one that he learned a few days ago. I don't want to use the name Yangzhou anymore because it is not beautiful. So I decided to use the Great Spirit. Tomorrow it will be called Fireworks in March, and the day after that it will be called 1,000 Miles Happy Wind. Chapter 1105. Hung Mu Liren's fist carried the power of Hao Yin and landed on Ning Ke's body. But he could not kill Ning Ke, which was unbelievable to him. Ning Ke was covered in blood and wounds. Even his heart was broken, but he was still standing. How could that be? The big black horse ran to Ning Ke and lowered its head to his right hand so that Ning Ke could put his hand on his neck to help him stand. Ning Ke gently stroked its mane to show that he was fine. I forgot the order of Lien Sheng's words. Is it Buddhism to cultivate the devil? Or is it Buddhism to cultivate the devil? But it's the same. Only the Vajra body can remain unstained. Ning Ke wiped the blood on his hand on the front of his academy uniform and looked at Hung Mu Liren across the street. He said, "You know me well, but you don't seem to know what I spent the longest time cultivating." In the world of cultivation, he first learned Talisman Taoism, then the Great Spirit, then Lien Sheng's Devil's Doctrine, and finally he learned Buddhism from the statue of Venerable in the Lang Temple. But in fact, he had been practicing Buddhism for the longest time. The time here was not in the real world, but in the Buddha's chessboard. There he had been practicing Buddhism for 1,000 years. In the end, he had turned the mountain-like Buddhist statue into Song Song's appearance. And during that process, he had been with Sang Sang. Sang Sang had always been in his body and heart. His body and mind already possessed some kind of divinity. From this point of view, while he was cultivating Buddhism, he was also cultivating the devil. He had reached the extreme. What had happened in the world of the chessboard 1,000 years ago was the last memory he wanted to recall. Except for the eldest brother who vaguely knew a little about it, he had never told anyone about the details. Taoism regarded him as a great enemy and had collected a lot of information, but they did not know that the current him, in addition to those world-shaking means, also had the Dharma. Hung Mu Liren did not know either, so he could not understand Ning Ke's words. But he felt uneasy subconsciously. His dark eyes were filled with vigilance. For a powerful cultivator like him, his mind could move the heaven and earth. The hurricane rose again in the city of Yangzhou. The clouds in the sky twisted and the aura of heaven and earth became chaotic. Hung Mu Liren took advantage of the wind and came to the front of Ning Ke in an instant. His right fist that was burning with divine fire turned into a bright, flowing fire and punched at Ning Ke's face like a meteorite. Late spring was also the beginning of summer. Apart from the corpses hanging on the trees between the bridges, the scenery inside and outside of Yangzhou City was excellent. The weeds were green, and the wildflowers were in full bloom. The mist dyed the city into a magnificent fireworks scene. Previously, when the big black horse was galloping in the wilderness and under the shade of the trees in the city, an inconspicuous little yellow flower had fallen on its mane. Now it was shivering in the wind. Ning Kei's right hand was stroking its mane and the little yellow flower. He picked it up casually. He picked up the little yellow flower with his fingers and faced the hurricane that filled the street, as well as the fiery fist. In the strong wind, the petals of the little yellow flower fell backwards, but refused to leave the weak stem. An extremely compassionate aura was released from the petal. Hengmu Liren's fist slowed down and could not land on Ning Quebec. Ning Kei did not turn into a Buddha. He summoned the external Dharma idol. A faintly discernible Buddha appeared behind him. The Buddha did not have a broad forehead and big ears, but looked like a plump girl. It was not the Buddha or the Wisdom King, but Sang Sang. It was the Buddha that he had cultivated for 1,000 years. Hengmu Liren said he was fighting for Haoyan. Ning Kei said he was the same, and he had fought for her for countless years. Even now, he could let her fight for him. The burning Haoyan's divine flame was still circling around Hengmu Liren's fist. It was bright, and his face was extremely pale under the light. His eyes were filled with anxiety, anger, and unwillingness. Tianqi was a gift from Haoyan. How could he hurt Haoyan with the power that Haoyan gave him? That would be blasphemy. So what? Without the power of faith, how could you invite the real Haoyan? Hengmu Liren shouted furiously. His voice was like thunder in spring, exploding inside and outside the city of Yangzhou. He raised his state to its peak and continued to attack the little flower in Ning Kei's hand. His body suddenly became extremely tall and big. His hair was disheveled, and his body was emitting white-hot mist. He looked like a god from the ancient times. If not for the anger in his solemn expression, he would look more like one. She is not Haoyan. She is just the Buddha in your heart. The most hypocritical Buddha. The most hypocritical Buddha. The chief monk would not kill anyone even with a monk's staff. He would be chopped into a dog by Jun Mo. Even if you become a Buddha, what can you do to me? Hengmu Liren, who looked like a god, looked down at Ning Kei with a violent expression. Ning Kei's body kept bleeding. The Buddha incarnation of Sang Sang stood behind him silently and looked at the street with pity. No one knew whether it was looking at Hengmu or Ning Quebec. Hengmu was right. Without the power of faith, no matter how profound Ning Kei's Dharma was, he could not invite the real Sang Sang. He could only protect himself but not hurt Hengmu. Yangzhou City was not Chang'an. Everyone here who was loyal to the Tang Empire and the Academy and was willing to help Ning Kei had been killed by Hengmu. Or they had been killed by Ning Kei and did not even dare to think about it. Therefore, Ning Kei could not write the talisman or gather the power of faith. The Academy doesn't like to call that power faith. The towering Buddha's light and the godlike horizontal tree were fighting fiercely on the long street. Ning Kei and the little yellow flower between his fingers seemed a little small in the middle, but his voice was still so calm. We call it faith. After saying this, he loosened his fingers, allowing the little yellow flower to be blown away by the wind from his fist and disappear without a trace. Meanwhile, the Buddha incarnation behind him was also destroyed by the wind. The light of Buddha suddenly disappeared into his body. He held the handle of the iron cutlass. Countless faintly discernible and faint powers came from everywhere in and outside the city of Yangzhou. They floated toward him and entered his body one by one. Hengmu Liren's face turned pale. He murmured in confusion. How could this be? Those powers were the power of faith that he thought Ning Kei could never obtain in the city of Yangzhou. Or in Ning Kei's own words, it was the power of faith. Even if the Buddha came back to life, how could he obtain the faith of the dead? Ning Kei waved the iron cutlass and hacked at Hengmu Liren. The Buddha could not hack people, but he could. The iron cutlass simply fell down. It was not a simple move, because it carried the faith of countless dead people in Qinghe Prefecture. The wind blew violently. The Dharma and the divine light intertwined and then tore each other into pieces. Hemu Liren shouted like thunder. He burned Hao Ian's divine flame at the cost of his life and tried to block the cutlass. Ning Ke knew nothing about faith when he was in Chang. The reason why he could write the 2 talismans with the array I pestle was that he accepted the fearless faith of the Tangs in Chang'an. Now he had a deep understanding of faith. Without Chang, and he did not have enough power to write the talismans. But he could use the Dharma to obtain enough power to hack thousands of times again. Hemu Liren might be able to block his cutlass, but he could not block his thousands of cutlasses. On the long street, the dust was everywhere. The horrible sound of the air being torn could be heard, mixed with Hemu Liren's screams of fear, despair, anger, and unwillingness. In an instant, as the Buddhism sect said, Hemu Liren blocked Ning Ke's 3,782 cutlasses. Ning Ke hacked 13,782 cutlasses. Therefore, 10,000 cutlasses fell on Hemu Liren's body. The dust gradually settled. Hemu Liren, who was like a god a moment ago, was hacked into an ordinary person. He was covered in blood and lowered his head. He looked calm and composed, just like the young manservant in indigo who chopped firewood in the Revelation Institute 2 years ago. With a clang, Ning Ke sheathed his cutlass. Affected by the sound, Hemu Liren's Taoist heart that had been cut into pieces could no longer be intact. He spat out blood, and his internal organs that looked like gold and jade burst out from the wounds on his chest and abdomen. He lowered his head and looked at those horrible cutlasses with a confused expression. The next moment, the crystallized Great Spirit that Ning Ke had slapped into his body violently spurted out along the 10,000 cuts on his body. In the shrill, whistling sound, a gale swept through the long street and then went far away. The gust of wind rolled up the reeds on the great swamp and startled the birds outside of Linkaw. It did not stop until it reached the West Hill Divine Kingdom and returned to the temple among the Peach Mountains. Ning Ke stood in the howling wind. He looked indifferent and tired. He did not feel happy at all. He ignored Hemu Liren and sat down with his legs crossed to regulate his breath. The big black horse stood beside him and looked around vigilantly. Hundreds of cavalrymen of the divine halls had surrounded the long street, but they did not dare to come closer. I don't understand why. Hemu Liren lowered his head and murmured. He sounded like he was in great pain. You're indeed very strong, and you've made ample preparations. You know that the iron arrow isn't my strongest technique. In order to destroy that technique of mine, you've even killed so many people. Ning Ke said, but you don't know that I have become a Buddhist cultivator. And you don't know that I have learned something in the wilderness. The dead and the living are all human beings. You killed those people, so you deserve to die. I see. Hemu Liren raised his head and looked at him with a bitter smile. It seems that you have prepared a lot to kill me. Now that I think about it, I am willing to die. Ning Ke said, you think too much. With that, he stood up and jumped onto the big black horse. He looked around and saw the city of Yangzhou. There were small bridges flowing water, fireworks, old trees, and faintly crows. It was a miserable world, but there was no trace of her. Hemu Liren looked at his back and shouted unwillingly, it is already the end. Can't you just admit that I am special? I am the son of Hao Ian. How can I be the same as the other useless people you killed? Ning Ke looked back at him and said, you always say that you are her son. The problem is that I never remember that she gave birth to you. How can I admit it? The big black horse stirred up the dust and headed to the south of the city of Yangzhou. Hemu Liren looked at his back with great difficulty. He was lost and finally understood. Then he died. Fireworks in May. Ning Ke killed another person. The Tang army went to Yangzhou. As for the reason why I couldn't explode yesterday, I thought about it and didn't say it yesterday. Today, I'll report it to you. It's because a friend from another city has come to visit me. These 2 days, I've had to drive for 4 to 5 hours every day and I also have to make arrangements for meals and whatnot. I'm exhausted. It's already very hard for me to be able to keep updating, and the quality is still acceptable. I'm very satisfied, and I hope that everyone is satisfied as well. It'll be fine tomorrow. After saying so much, I still strongly urge everyone to vote for me. Chapter 1106. The big black horse galloped out of the long street, and no one dared to stop it, leaving only a trail of smoke. Dozens of miles out of the city, there was only mist and the wind from the lake. Even though they were near the great swamp, the big black horse did not slow down. Its hooves flew and continued to move forward, stepping on rocks and grass. It leaped high on the shore and landed on a South Gene Kingdom Navy warship several feet away. Countless splashing sounds could be heard. The South Gene Kingdom Navy officers on the warship did not dare to stay and jumped into the lake one after another. They did not care that the lake water was still cold in early summer. Those who could steer the ship had all left. How could such a large naval warship move forward on the lake? The sailors of the South Gene Kingdom and the people not far away all looked at the warship and the big black horse on the deck. Deep in their terrified eyes, they were watching a good show. Ning Ke turned over and dismounted from the horse. He took out several pieces of light yellow fu paper from the bag beside the saddle and casually pasted them on both sides of the warship's deck. He flicked his fingers and the fu paper gradually faded, as if it was being burned or melted by the lake wind. A not very strong but very stable talisman suddenly enveloped the entire warship. The chi of heaven and earth within a few miles of the lake was summoned. The sails were blown by the wind, and the hull shook slightly. It began to move. Tens of thousands of South Gene Kingdom Navy officers saw this scene and were stunned. They had never thought that there would be someone in the world who could drive such a heavy warship by himself. The next moment, they began to speculate about how Ning Ke would control the warship's draft and direction. In short, their emotions were extremely complicated. Ning Ke did not care about the warship's draft. The Great Swamp Lake was extremely deep. As long as they avoided the reeds and sand that could be seen with the naked eye, there would not be too much of a problem. As for the direction, it was very simple. He only needed the ship to go south. He did not care about the specific destination because the South Gene Kingdom was in the south. He had already prepared the talisman paper in Chong and city and summoned the chi of heaven and earth to boost the ship. The battleship sailed at an extremely fast speed, and the heavy sails swayed uneasily by the lake wind. Fortunately, there were no leaks. It only took them half a day to board the ship from the south of Qinghe Prefecture to the shore in the south. They passed through the entire Great Swamp and arrived at dusk. Although the South Gene Kingdom had been through many troubles, it was still the second most powerful country in the Central Plains, second only to the Tang Empire. The response from the imperial court to the military was extremely fast. They were already prepared for his arrival. Countless cavalrymen surrounded the dock called Tay County. There were also hundreds of cultivators hiding in the woods on both sides of the official road, ready to attack at the command. Ning Ke knew very well what was waiting for him, but he had no intention of hiding his tracks. He rode on the big black horse and continued to head south expressionlessly. Strangely, no one attacked him. The cavalrymen and cultivators of the South Gene Kingdom did not even have the courage to attack him because of his name and the iron bow on his shoulder. They could only watch him move forward. This fact made them feel extremely disappointed. 100 miles to the south, a stubborn and proud mountain that looked like an ancient sword could be faintly seen in the distance. It was the former holy land for cultivation, the Sword Garret of the South Gene Kingdom. Looking at the Sword Garret and thinking of the proud swordsmen who were once enemies and then companions, Ning Ke reached out his hand to stop the big black horse. After a moment of silence, he looked at the vigilant cavalrymen and cultivators of the South Gene Kingdom and said, "I will stay here for a while." When the snow fell, he jumped off the city of Chong and then disappeared from the world. Few people knew that he had secretly sneaked into the northern military camp and secretly made a risky plan with General Su Chi and fourth brother to destroy the Golden Tribe. When he and the Academy and the Tang army finally defeated the Golden Tribe in the city of Wei, he stayed for a few days to write talismans in blood. Then he did not stop. He went to the southern border of the Tang Empire, out of the Verdant Canyon, killed Hengmu, and went down to the Dingxing River in the Yangzhou. He had traveled thousands of miles to kill people and had not rested or slept for 100 days. His spirit and body had long been exhausted, but he still moved forward. It seemed that something was urging him to speed up, as if he was racing with someone. Today, in the territory of the South Jin Kingdom, at a place where he could see the sword garret from afar, he suddenly stopped and told everyone that he would stay here for a while. This was very surprising. The cavalrymen and cultivators of the South Jin Kingdom looked at him on the black horse with complicated emotions. They looked at his pale face and his haggard appearance. They thought to themselves, is he finally tired? Mr. 13 of the Academy, who was rumored to kill for fun and was close to the devil. Did he want to stop after killing so many people? Anything that lasted for too long or happened too frequently would eventually make people sick of it. Except for Ning Ke and Sang Sang, Jing Tingshan was the only one who never got sick of each other. The temperature in the south was relatively higher. In the fields and hills on both sides of the river, the heat was unbearable. The coalition army of the Divine Hall and the army of the Great River Kingdom, who had been confronting each other for a long time, were already extremely tired. Even the corpses of their dead comrades on the battlefield could hardly arouse their passion and desire to fight. A slender and slightly curved sword was carefully wiped by a white handkerchief. The blood left by the enemy in the morning was wiped clean. The body of the sword reflected the green mountains behind it and looked very beautiful. Cat Girl quietly wiped the sword. The cute and naive little girl in the past was now married and became the calmest or cold-blooded swordsman on the battlefield. The most horrible place like the battlefield was not only annoying, but it was also easy to train or change people. Zhuozhua stood behind her and looked at the camp of the coalition army of the Divine Hall a few miles away. She frowned slightly and still could not understand why the great divine priest of South Sea would let the army set up the formation with their backs to the river. Even if the man had been fishing in the South Sea all year round and was completely ignorant of military affairs, the Divine Hall had never lacked real military masters. Her eyes were dazzled by the reflection of the sword. She could not help but squint and look at Cat Girl with a touch of pity in her eyes. Cat Girl's newly married man died in a surprise attack by the powerhouses of the Divine Hall more than 10 days ago. The newly married woman became a widow. Although the little girl looked calm, everyone could see the hidden pain and anger in her. The guardian of the Great River Kingdom had changed from the master of calligrapher to the queen. The women of the Black Ink Garden with swords on their waists were always the symbol of courage and virtue in this country. In this tragic war, the disciples of the Black Ink Garden had always been fighting in the most difficult and tragic places. If it were not for them, the coalition army of the West Hill Divine Palace with more cultivators would have already succeeded in breaking through this line of defense and killed into the hinterland of the Great River Kingdom. Of course, the main reason why Zhuozhihua and Cat Girl could fight so confidently was that there were two big chariots standing side by side, dozens of feet behind them. A royal chariot surrounded by snow-white gauze and a sacred chariot surrounded by blood-red gauze. In the royal chariot sat the queen of the Great River Kingdom, Imo Shanshan, and in the sacred chariot sat the great divine priest of judgment, Yi Hongyu. There was also a sacred chariot in the hills on the south bank of the Great River. It belonged to Zhao Nanhai. The great divine priest of the West Hill Divine Palace's Revelation Hall had been empty for a long time. Many people thought that Zhao Nanhai, who was deeply trusted by the Abbey Dean, would take over this position. However, they did not expect that the war would come so fast that there was no time for the succession ceremony of the great divine priest of Revelation. Therefore, Zhao Nanhai was now only leading the coalition army with the title of Great Divine Priest of West Hill. Zhuozhihua did not understand why the coalition army of the Divine Hall set up camp with their backs to the river. Zhao Nanhai, the great divine priest of the South Sea, did not seem to be afraid to show his terrible military ability to the whole southern continent. In fact, this lord who was born as a fisherman was very experienced on the battlefield. Some time ago, he successfully dragged the army of the Great River Kingdom into a trap. If more than 100 cavalrymen of the Divine Hall who were loyal to Yi Hongyu had not suddenly rebelled on the battlefield, the Great River Kingdom would have been hit hard. The news of Ning Kei's 2 battles in the city of Wei and Yangzhou had not reached here yet. However, the role of a real powerhouse in the war was becoming more and more obvious. It had gradually become an indisputable fact. If the Great River Kingdom wanted to survive under the terrifying pressure of the West Hill Divine Palace Coalition Army, they had to find a way to kill Zhao Nanhai, or at least threaten him, so that he would not be able to focus on the battlefield. Thinking of this, Zhuozhihua turned around to look at the 2 large chariots. The queen could not enter the battlefield lightly, but what about the powerhouse in the sacred chariot? The sacred chariot beside the king's chariot was as bloody as it used to be. Even if the great divine priest of judgment left the Peach Mountain, she would still be the great divine priest of judgment. Even the hierarch lord could not deprive her of her position. Naturally, her temperament would never change. According to her usual style, she would have long thought of killing Zhao Nanhai. Why was she still sitting in the sacred chariot after so many days? The great divine priest of judgment has not moved. It seems that she has guessed something. In the hills beside the great river, Zhao Nanhai stood in front of the sacred chariot that was heavily protected by thousands of papal cavalrymen of the West Hill Divine Palace. He looked at the 2 large chariots in the Great River Kingdom's camp and frowned slightly. If she has guessed it, then Ning Kei might have guessed it too. After all, they are very similar. The situation in the Great River was dangerous. Actually, his situation had been very dangerous from the beginning. With Yi Hongyu's crazy fighting ability and the queen of the Great River Kingdom, who was proficient in talisman Taoism, there was an 80% chance that he would lose his life in this angry yellow river if the enemy really risked their lives to attack. That was why he ordered the West Hill Divine Palace Coalition Army to line up with their backs to the river. It seemed that he was risking his life and inviting Yi Hongyu and Mo Shanshan to kill him because of his judgment of the situation. But in fact, that was not the case. The great divine priest of the South Sea, who shouldered the responsibility of the divine halls in the south, was as thin and dark as before. He was silent, like the surging yellow river below the hills behind him. There was no need for words. He rarely talked to himself. At this time, he was not talking to himself, but to someone else. Ning Kei did not continue to the south. It seems that he has guessed something. A dull voice came from the sacred chariot. The river wind blew the gauze curtain, and a curtain of light could be vaguely seen. There was a figure behind the curtain. It was the hierarch of the West Hill Divine Palace, Xiong Chamo. Typing is easy, but writing is hard. Write and update. I won't make any changes today. I won't ask for monthly votes if I write more. I'll make up for it. Write as much as you can. I'll try to get a comment that I've turned over a new leaf or a compliment for being handsome. Thank you. Chapter 11:07. There was a middle-aged Taoist beside the carriage. He wore an ordinary Taoist robe and had an ordinary appearance. His expression was also ordinary, and there was nothing special about him. Naturally, no one knew his true identity. There were hundreds of red-robed priests from Peach Mountain in the West Hill Divine Palace Coalition Army. The most powerful force of Hao-Ian Taoism was gathered here, not in the divine halls of Peach Mountain. Such a terrifying force was not only waiting for Yi Hongyu and Mo Shanshan, but also Ning Kei. When the news of the Golden Tent's destruction and the death of Ada and the National Master reached Peach Mountain, Hao-Ian Taoism began to prepare. A few days ago, the news of Ning Kei killing Hengmu in the Qinghe River had also reached here. This fact made the most powerful people of the West Hill Divine Palace silent for a long time. According to Ning Kei's speed of killing people, he should be arriving soon. The hierarch, Zhao Nanhai, and the middle-aged priest began to prepare for the final battle. Even if Yi Hongyu and Mo Shanshan had some kind of tacit understanding with Ning Ke, the West Hill Divine Palace thought they could finish the battle in one go, because they had been preparing for a long time. To their surprise, Yi Hongyu did not attack, nor did Ning Quebec. If Yi Hongyu chose to wait and see because of her sensitivity to battle, then what about Ning Ke? Where'd he go? Ning Ke did not go anywhere. Just like what he told the people of South Jin when he looked at the sword garret. He stayed in South Jin for a long time. He did not stay for sightseeing. He killed many people along the way. He would spare those who surrendered. He would kill those who did not. He did not surrender to the Tang, but to the people of the sword garret. These were the three sentences that Ning Ke told the people of South Jin. When the West Hill Divine Palace was ready to welcome him to the south, he stayed in the second most powerful country in the world and began to proclaim and show his cruelty. He had killed people in Panshan Commandery, in Lincoln City, in the alleys, and in the Imperial Palace. He had killed the new emperor of the Divine Halls of West Hill, the Prime Minister, and many others. Time passed slowly but unstoppably as the people waited silently by the river and the cold-blooded killing of the South Jin Kingdom. It was midsummer in the world. Ning Ke disappeared again in the cruel weather. What he left behind were those words, his body full of blood, and the chaotic South Jin Kingdom. The Southern Battlefront Army and the Yulin Royal Guards of the Tang Empire had already recovered Qinghe. After purging the old warlords, they would continue their journey south after a short rest. How could the South Jin Kingdom resist them? He had really relied on his own strength to determine the direction of the kingdom war. Why? Because he could kill people, and he was good at it. In the past, the only person in the academy who could kill people like this was Kaharan. However, it had been a long time, and he was gradually forgotten by the world. What he was doing now was to make people remember him again. He entered the city of Wei, and the Golden Tribe perished. He crossed the Great Swamp, and the South Jin Kingdom perished. Now he disappeared again. No one knew which country in the human world he had gone to and which country was about to perish. The midsummer had passed, but the heat was still hot. The trap that the West Hill Divine Palace had prepared for Ning Ke by the Great River had never appeared, nor had they expected that he would suddenly appear near the West Hill Divine Palace. The West Hill Divine Palace referred to Taoism, while the West Hill Divine Palace referred to the location, which was the solemn Taoist temple on the top of Peach Mountain. From the small town, one could see the sacred place. The big black horse came to the West Hill Divine Kingdom and walked silently in the small town in front of Peach Mountain. Compared to the sacred Taoist temple on the top of the mountain, the town was quiet and secular, which was a sharp contrast. Ning Ke was going to buy some roasted sweet potatoes to eat, but he changed his mind when he entered the town. He thought for a while and got off the horse. He held the reins and walked to a shabby shop in the east of the town. Getting off the horse was a sign of respect. There was no one in the West Hill Divine Palace who deserved his respect, but the person in the shop was. Even though he did not know the person's character, he knew that he deserved it just because he was old. It was a butcher's shop, the only butcher's shop in the small town. Just like the small town at the border between the kingdom of Song and the kingdom of Yin, there was only one butcher's shop wherever the person was. The late summer was still unbearably hot. The town seemed to be in a steamer. The big black horse, who had continuously taken elixirs and eaten all the delicacies of the wilderness with Gaga, could not stand it even though its physique had been modified to be extremely special. It panted heavily. Even Ning Ke untied the collar of the front courtyard. The butcher's shop was even more stuffy. The air was filled with the smell of blood and boiling water. The air was suffocating and unbearably hot. The strong middle-aged man, however, was still wearing a leather apron. He stood in front of the thick chopping board and swung his heavy knife. Not a single drop of sweat could be seen on his bronze-colored body. The blade fell, and what splashed out were snowflakes formed by blood and fat. Ning Ke stood outside the door of the butcher's shop and looked at the butcher behind the chopping board. He said, "Hello." The butcher did not look up at him and continued chopping the meat. He said, "Just SOSO." Ning Ke was silent for a while and asked, "Have you seen her?" The butcher stopped chopping the meat, took a piece of cloth from the rope, and wiped his face and hands. Ning Ke continued, I've been beating her for a long time, but I haven't found her. The butcher threw the wet cloth on the butcher's knife and looked at him. He said, You're not as fast as the three of them, so of course you're not as fast as them. There were two words in that sentence. The first word referred to speed, and the second was the time it would take to find her. Ning Ke thought for a while and nodded politely. He said, Thank you. I'm leaving now. The butcher reached out and held the handle of the knife through the wet cloth so that his hand would not slip. Where are you going? I'm going to continue looking for her. Do I need to kill to find her? I thought even if I couldn't find her, I could at least force the Abbey Dean to come back. You've killed tens of thousands of people, and the Abbey Dean hasn't shown up. Why do you still need to kill? Ning Ke raised his eyebrows and looked at the butcher. He said, I thought people like you and the drunkard who have experienced the everlasting night wouldn't care about what we're doing now. Am I right? The everlasting night was the most tragic story in the world, and there were countless tragic scenes. The butcher had experienced it, seen it, suffered it, and feared it. Naturally, he wouldn't care about what Ning Ke and Taoism had done. He said, I just have something that I've been wanting to ask the Academy. Ning Ke turned around and looked at him for a long time. He said, Have you ever asked before? The butcher said, I can't beat the headmaster and Kuhauren. The hidden meaning in this sentence was clear. His question was definitely not a good one. He couldn't beat them before, so he didn't have an answer. Now the next generation of the Academy was no match for him, so he wanted the answer he wanted. Ning Ke's expression became calmer and even a little proud. He said, Go ahead. From these few words, he was no longer representing himself, the ordinary man who was looking for his wife, but the representative of the Academy. So he had to be calmer and more confident. The butcher raised the meat knife on the chopping board and placed it in front of him. With this movement, Ning Ke felt that the threshold of the butcher's shop seemed to rise along with the ground. The seemingly ordinary, thick and greasy butcher's knife seemed to be as heavy as a mountain. The headmaster always said that he was benevolent, and the Academy always said that they were for the human world. Even though Kuhauren had killed so many people, he still thought that he was never wrong. Even if he killed people, he killed for the human world. Just like what the Academy and you are doing now, is it also for the human world to kill half of the people in the human world? The butcher looked at him and said, Save the human world? The drunkard and I don't have such a grand wish, but how can your headmaster judge us based on this wish? Why is the Academy doing the right thing? Only by saving the human world according to your way can it be saved? Why do you have to save the human world? Ning Ke looked at him quietly and said, There is a saying that asks the common people instead of ghosts and gods. Perhaps only time can prove who is right. But at least what we see and hear with our eyes, and what the Tang Empire has proven for 1,000 years, what the headmaster has done is at least relatively correct. That's because he has the biggest fists. The butcher said expressionlessly, Fists are more reasonable than shit. Is the Academy such a place? Ning Ke thought of youngest uncle, third sister, and himself. He kept silent for a long time, and then he thought of his headmaster, eldest brother, and second brother. He sorted out the things that he had thought through a long time ago. You're not talking about the Academy, nor the Tang Empire. He looked at the butcher and said, The Academy is a land of gentlemen, and the Tang Empire is a country of gentlemen. But I am not. A gentleman can be deceived, but I don't want to be a gentleman. I would rather suffer eternal damnation and try to fulfill my headmaster's wish. The butcher said, What good does it do for you to let your soul walk in the underworld? Ning Ke looked at him and said very seriously, Freedom. Although this word is very easy to make people feel greasy, like the knife in your hand, without freedom, it is really boring. The butcher said, Even if it is unknown and dangerous? Ning Ke said, You should have vaguely guessed where I came from, so you should know that what I said is correct. I have seen it, and it should be like that. The butcher was silent for a long time, and then said, That is the underworld. If you insist that the real world is the underworld. Ning Ke said. The butcher looked at him and said, In the past, Haoyan Taoism said that you are the son of Yama. It is actually wrong, but it is also right, because you will bring the world into the underworld. Ninkei was silent for a long time. He thought of the changes of his identity over the years, the stories of the past, and the escape. He felt a little ridiculous and sad. He said, "It seems it is indeed so." The butcher said, "The human world, why should we enter the underworld?" Ninkei said, "Why not?" The butcher said, "It is very cold there." Ninkei said, "But it is also very big." After saying this, the inside and outside of the butcher shop became quiet. Because it was too quiet, there was a dead silence. The dead pig in the shop stared at the two with its round eyes, and the sheep's head in the pot of boiling water also squinted at them. They had their own ideas, and there was no consensus, so they wanted to die. In order to save my breath, there is no time to revise it, and I can't look back. The writing will definitely be rough, and I'll find time to revise it. Chapter 1108. Ninkei looked at him quietly, without the slightest fear. After a long time, the butcher put the knife back on the chopping board, but his hand did not leave the handle. He said, "I don't care about you killing people, but I care about eternity. You and anyone else from the Academy should never enter the West Hill again, or I will kill you too." Ninkei said, "I'm already here. How can you kill me?" The butcher did not answer. He just tightened his grip on the knife. The saber in his hand was the answer. The saber was as heavy as a mountain and as sharp as the wind. From the beginning of human history to the end, it had been the most terrifying saber, just like the cyan steel sword that Koharin once held upside down. Ninkei's expression became serious. His right hand did not reach behind his back to hold the handle of the iron knife. His iron knife was strong, but it was not as strong as the butcher's. "I can't beat you, but you can't catch up with me either." After saying this, Ninkei turned around and left the butcher's shop with a big black horse. The butcher stood behind the chopping board and looked at his back quietly. His eyes were as sharp as knives. The closer Ninkei got to the Peach Mountain, the sharper his eyes became. The farther Ninkei got from the Peach Mountain, the calmer his eyes became, like an old knife slowly being sheathed. Under the gaze of the butcher, Ninkei walked out of the small town. He looked back and saw several divine halls under the blue sky and white clouds. The butcher's shop was the same as before in the small town of Cuxia. He could not help but think for a long time. He was no match for the butcher, and he did not know if anyone from the Academy could beat him. The butcher was guarding the Peach Mountain, so the Tang cavalry could not enter the mountain. Neither could the people from the Academy. Ninkei came here today to see if there was a peaceful solution. Unfortunately, the butcher had made his stance clear. The Academy had to think of another way. There was only one person who could change all of this. The South Jin Kingdom was surrounding the West Hill Divine Kingdom. Further south was the Great River. There were many small countries in the east. The Song Kingdom was the Song Kingdom, and the Qi Kingdom was the Qi Kingdom. All the countries were preparing for war. At the end of summer, Ninkei left the West Hill Divine Kingdom. He did not go to the Great River, but to the east. Divine priests from the Song, Qi, Liang, and Chun kingdoms were dying one after another. The morale of the allied forces was greatly reduced. Just when the West Hill Divine Palace finally reacted and sent a large number of powerhouses to kill or at least temporarily trap Ninkei, no one expected that he had already quietly come to the Tile Mountain. The small town in front of the Wam Mountain was still the same as before. The people still relied on stone carvings to make a living. The Yulan Hungry Ghost Festival was long gone, and the incense in the Lang Temple was not as popular as it used to be. Fortunately, after the collapse of the Buddha statue, the countless beautiful stones that fell were enough to carve for hundreds of years. In the early morning, it rained around the Tile Mountain. The sea breeze made the mountaintop cooler than the inland. Even though it was still summer, it felt like autumn, just like back then. Ninkei stood in front of the broken body of the Buddha statue, looking at the mountain path between the green mountains, the looming palace behind the forest, and the huge rocks all over the mountains and valleys. He said, "It seems that the statue imitates the Buddha, but it is not real after all." Monk Wan Hai stood beside him. He put his palms together and chanted the name of Buddha. He sighed and said, "Then what is real?" Ning Ke turned to look at him and said, "The South Jin Kingdom is about to fall. Don't worry about the Yin Kingdom for now. The Divine Hall can't even defeat the Great River. Do you think Haotian Taoism can make a comeback? Victory is the only thing that matters." Monk Guanhai was silent for a moment and said, "Don't you think it's strange?" Ning Ke did not directly answer the question. The slightly cold rain fell on his face and washed away all his expressions. He said, "When we go to the West Hill, we will go to the Lang Temple too. Let's think of it as sharing the spoils." Monk Guanhai said, "The Academy is destroying Buddhism. We are the disciples of Buddhism." Ning Ke said, "Wrong. Second brother is destroying the Buddhist kingdom, not Buddhism." Monk Guanhai said, "Buddha is merciful. Too many people have died, and you have killed too many." Ning Ke turned to look at him and said, "Wrong again. Your Buddha has never been merciful. He saved all living beings and taught them to learn Buddhism. In the end, he only cultivated a smaller nirvana. All he wanted was to get through the everlasting night and pursue more than eternity. Has Buddha ever really cared about the human world?" Monk Guanhai said, "According to what you said, what have we been cultivating for decades?" Ning Ke said, "The Buddhist scriptures are not all written by Buddha. Master Chishan taught me to read them. You have also read them. Cultivating Buddhism is not cultivating Buddha, but ourselves." Monk Guanhai was silent. Ning Ke continued, "You are the Buddha, and so am I. Everyone in the world can become a Buddha. Just like what Yisu said in the scripture of the New Stream, everyone is Haotian. So the human world is naturally a Buddha kingdom and a divine kingdom." Monk Guanhai sighed with emotion. He looked at his pale and thin face and said, "What about you? Continue killing like this? You can't hold on for long." There were some wild flowers in the ruins of the Buddha statue. They were yellow, very similar to the one he saw years ago. Ning Ke looked at the flower and the mountain path hidden in the forest. He thought of what Sang Sang said in the temple. He slightly squinted his eyes, but it was hard to tell whether he was happy or sad. He had traveled thousands of miles in the human world and killed people at the expense of his state and lifespan. Just like the butcher said, he was not as fast as the Abbey Dean and the drunkard, but he believed that he knew her feelings and her most cherished past in the human world. Even if he could not sense her specific location, it was still possible to find her. For example, she might be living in the temple on the Tile Mountain, right? Unfortunately, she was not there. He said, "I'll hold on for as long as I can." Monk Guanhai said, "Prove Tao by killing?" Ning Ke shook his head and said, "That's too pretentious and perverted. Only someone like Lien Sheng would do something like that. Although the number of people I've killed and will kill is no less than Lien Sheng, and I'm no less evil than him, my way of thinking is different. I don't know what will happen to the human world, and I don't have any intention of destroying the world." Monk Guanhai sighed and said, "It seems that you also think something is wrong." This was the second time he mentioned it. The victory of the Tang Empire and the Academy seemed to be built by Ning Ke's killing. But in fact, it was the general trend. He just used this horrible way to speed up the whole process. Taoism had ruled the world for countless years, and the West Hill Divine Palace had unimaginable resources. Logically speaking, they should not be defeated so quickly. The reason was Yisu's death. Because of Yisu's death, the new stream grew like weeds after the spring rain. It seriously shook the rule of Taoism. Because of Yisu's death, the West Hill Divine Palace was divided and had endless internal strife. Everything seemed to be because of the Abbey Dean's irrational decision. But would the Abbey Dean make an irrational decision? Even the most irrational person would not think so. Monk Guanhai would not think so, and neither would Ning Quebec. He had even vaguely guessed the truth. But he had no choice but to be a pawn. Guessing the Abbey Dean's thoughts did not mean that he could see through his plan. Ning Ke could only use the simplest solution to solve the complicated situation. The simplest solution was life and death. The distance between the sword and the knife was like two different worlds. He only hoped that he could be fast enough to change the human world before the Abbey Dean succeeded. Then, even if the Abbey Dean's plan succeeded, it would be meaningless. There were many people who wanted to change the human world. The headmaster, the Buddha, Kahaoren, and Lotus had all tried. Some failed, and some were still on the way. People like the drunkard and the butcher did not want to change the human world, which was also a kind of influence or change. But the premise was that these people were powerful. Some people might not be as unfathomable as the butcher in terms of state or strength, but they could still change the world because they had unfathomable and strong willpower. Deep in the West Wilderness, the dark underground world which had been surrounded by the prison wall for tens of thousands of years had been completely changed by one person. The wildfire lit up the world and the Prajna Peak and also pointed out the way. The uprising war over the past few years had completely changed the order of the underground Buddha kingdom. Especially in early summer, the reinforcements of the Right King's palace were sneakily attacked by a Tang army that came out of the Pamir Mountains. Their supplies and fodder suffered heavy losses. Since then, no one could change the outcome of the war. Between the giant peaks that grew from the bottom of the giant sinkhole, there were flames everywhere. Many of the yellow temples hidden in the green forest had been swallowed by the flames. In the continuous forest, there were also many burn scars. The Taoist trees were gone, and countless mountain paths were exposed, like countless threads trying in vain to stitch something together. At the front of the mountain road, Jun Mo held the iron sword and looked at the seriously injured Qin Yin without any expression on his face. The clothes he used to wear were destroyed in the battle, and he picked up a monk's robe from somewhere. His new hair was still gray, so he did not keep it. It was very short and reflected the fire in the distance, making him look like a Buddha. Under a Bodhi tree not far away, Master Huangyang had already closed his eyes and left. As a Tang, he did not know how to deal with the academy and the Buddha kingdom. He did not know if he had found the answer after years of hard thinking. But no one was qualified to say that it was escape, or more accurately, relief. Qin Yin was covered in blood, and his kasaya was broken. He looked extremely haggard. He pointed at the wildfire on the mountain and the temples that were gradually turning into ashes, and said, "Killing people and destroying Buddha is the principle of the academy." Jun Mo said, "Destroying Buddha is my principle." Qin Yin said, "I have heard of a saying in the academy, existence is the principle." Jun Mo said, "Youngest brother's words are extremely wrong." Qin Yin said bitterly, "It is really impossible to reason with Mr. Second." Jun Mo's expression did not change, and he said, "Because I am reasonable. You can't reason with me." I went out for a walk after dinner, and then continued writing. Chapter 1109. Qin Yin looked at him and said with a complicated expression, "What is the hatred between the Buddha and the academy? From you to Ning Ke, it seems that you all want to destroy the academy. No matter what happens, you will not stop." Jun Mo said, "The academy does not enforce justice for heaven or ask questions for the human world. We only do what we want to do. We have our own reasons. You are of no benefit to the world. Why do you exist?" Qin Yin pointed to somewhere on the cliff platform and said, "The pear blossoms in the unknown mountains are beautiful, but no one can see them. They are of no benefit to the human world. Why do you exist?" Jun Mo shook his head and said, "The pear tree needs the nutrients in the soil and greedily takes the sunlight. The weeds under the tree must think differently from you. The Buddhism sect does not produce and only wants the human world to worship them. They are no different from Taoism. They are locusts and you're maggots. They are equally disgusting." Qin Yin disagreed and said, "The Buddha land is a paradise. Countless sages have meditated for thousands of years. They have their own spiritual fruits and thoughts. I don't ask you to respect them, but you should at least leave some seeds. The Buddha land is a paradise for monks, but a purgatory for the wicked. Only you can enjoy the fruits and jade. The metaphysical is called Tao. If you want to talk about Tao in the human world, you must let most people live like human beings." Jun Mo continued, "You want to persuade me with youngest brother's words. Let me give you some of youngest brother's words. He once said, "There will be steamed buns, rice wine, and everything else. As long as people are alive, everything can be reborn, such as your fruits and jade, and those Tao." Qin Yin was silent for a long time and asked, "What else?" "Another one is that all bald donkeys should die." "Senior brother, what you said makes sense." Jun Mo added, "The senior brother he was referring to was me." Qin Yin couldn't help but laugh bitterly. He was defeated by the Iron Sword today. The monks of the Commandment Hall were either dead or seriously injured. The monk soldiers and the noble armed forces in the tribes could no longer resist the tide of millions of slaves. Was the Xiankong Temple or the Buddhism sect really go to perish? As a world wayfarer of the Buddhism sect, Qin Yin felt very painful and unwilling to see such a scene. There were many others who felt the same way, such as the young monks who were moaning under the Bodhi tree, and the old monks who were weeping when they saw the burning temples. No one was willing to accept such an ending. The sounds of battle shook the heavens. The revolutionary army surged along the mountain path like a tide and was about to drown the entire Prajna Peak. The people at the forefront could already see what was happening on the mountain path. Looking at those slaves who used to be lowly burning the temple like madmen and running around recklessly, Qin Yin felt that these people were crazy. With a determined look, he sat cross-legged on the mountain road and began to recite scriptures. He was chanting the rebirth mantra. She didn't know if he was to see himself off. The tranquil chanting of sutras rose from the mountain path and spread to the countless plateaus and temples in the mountains. The young monk, who was covered in blood, struggled to sit up. He supported his shaky body and sat under the tree. As Qin Yin began to chant, the old monk wiped away the tears in his wrinkles and began to chant. In the ruins of the main hall of the Xiankong Temple, dozens of powerhouses from the Commandment Hall, who were on the verge of death, also began to chant. Suddenly, a melodious bell rang out from an unknown place, accompanying the chanting of sutras like an accompaniment. The chanting turned into the chanting of Buddha. The chanting of Buddha echoed throughout the mountain. A sense of compassion, relief, and solemnity was released from countless monks and temples, permeating between the clouds and the sky and the wilderness underground. In the deepest part of the mountain, at the bottom of the cliff cave sealed by sand and stones, the chief monk of Scripture, who was chained to the wall by iron arrows, slowly opened his eyes. He heard the chanting of Buddha outside the mountain and knew that the Xiankong Temple and the Buddhism sect had reached the most dangerous moment. His eyes showed reluctance and then calmness. The chief monk struggled to raise his skinny hands and put them together in front of his chest. His withered face revealed a compassionate expression. His gray lips moved slightly. Although the voice was faint, it sounded like a dragon's roar in the sky. The chanting of Buddha from the cliffs finally came to the depths of the cliff cave and merged with the weak chanting of the chief monk. The meditation of countless monks merged with his meditation. Although he was a Buddha in the human world, he could not bear so many complicated beliefs. His facial features began to ooze blood, and his whole body began to emit a faint Buddha's light. Then his skin gradually faded in the Buddha's light, revealing his flesh and bones. He looked horrible. The beginning of life was just a pool of blood or pus. The Buddhism sect used this method to let believers know impermanence. They also did the same. Only in this way could they be truly pure. The chief monk closed his eyes. There was no slightest tremble in his sunken eye sockets. He seemed to be dead, or he was still alive. He was returning to the beginning of life, death. He was turning into pus and blood. Drip, drip, drip. The purest and filthiest blood dripped on the ground of the cliff cave and seeped into the depths of the mountain through a crack that was invisible to the naked eye. After a long time, it finally reached the bottom of the mountain. There was a river of hot magma underground. A chessboard was floating in the river. It was the Buddha's chessboard. When Sang Sang boarded the giant boat, she threw it back to the mountain from thousands of miles away and suppressed it in the horribly hot magma at the bottom of the mountain. Without external help, it would never wake up. Today, the Xiankong Temple was about to be destroyed. Countless monks died. Their souls floated into the chessboard to replenish their spirits. Then the chessboard finally woke up with the help of the chief monk's blood. On the mountain road, Qin Yin was covered in blood. He led thousands of monks and confronted countless uprising slaves. In the chanting of Buddha, the cliff of the mountain began to peel off. Smoke and dust were everywhere. This mountain was called Prajna Peak. It was transformed by the remains of the Buddha. The cliff plateau of the Prajna Peak was gradually destroyed. The cliff gradually became flat and blurred. That was the appearance of the Buddha. Suddenly, a white crane flew from the west. Suddenly, heavenly flowers fell from the clouds. The Buddha's light illuminated the world at the bottom of the giant sinkhole. The Buddha was dead, but he was still alive. No one could find him. Sang Sang and the headmaster could not find him, nor could they completely erase his existence. The Buddha woke up in the chessboard and looked at the human world quietly. He looked at those human beings who dared to destroy him like ants. There was no pity, only majesty and anger. The Revolutionary Army looked at the top of the mountain in horror. Looking at the majestic face in the light of Buddha, their bodies trembled uncontrollably and their faces became extremely pale. That was the real Buddha. They had never understood Buddhist scriptures, but they had been devout believers since childhood until June Mo appeared. They began to doubt whether the Buddha existed or not. Even if he existed, it was meaningless. Today, the Buddha appeared in the human world. The awe rooted in the depths of their souls made it difficult for them to think. They subconsciously let go of the weapons in their hands and knelt down in fear in front of the Buddha, transformed from the mountain. The chanting of Buddha and thousands of monks were solemn. No one dared to stand. June Mo stood with his head slightly lowered, and his expression was indifferent. There is one more chapter. It is almost finished. I will update it soon. Chapter 11:10. June Mo was wearing a monk's robe. His hair was very short, and his sleeves were fluttering in the wind. He looked like a young monk. He stood on a mountain road, facing the peak in the Buddha's light, as if he was in front of Buddha. He was silent and did not raise his iron sword to fight again. He was not afraid of any enemy, even Buddha. The chessboard had been suppressed by Hao Ian for many years. Even if Buddha was resurrected and came back to the human world through the mountain, he would be much weaker than Buddha in his heyday. At least he had a chance to interrupt the process. Buddha might really be waiting for Taoism and the academy to suffer losses and then come back. But he didn't care. He didn't care anymore. He didn't do anything. He put his hands behind his back, and the iron sword was behind him. He was very tired. His eyebrows were very straight, like a sword which could be used to fight, like a ruler which could be used to measure. He didn't want to fight anymore because he was still lonely in the human world. On the mountain peak, everyone was kneeling. Those who had fought bitterly with him for many years had knelt the moment the Buddha ancestor revealed his true form. He stood alone and felt really lonely. He didn't want to measure because it was really hard to measure people's hearts. There was a thin layer of frost between his eyebrows. The frost came from the bottom of his heart, and it was a little cold. In the Buddha's singing, he just stood there with his head down. All the slaves lowered their heads and touched the ground with their foreheads in fear. They didn't dare to look directly at the Buddha's light, let alone look at Buddha's face. Naturally, they couldn't see his somewhat desolate figure. They were like a group of ants bathed in the Buddha's light, not daring to move. But, however, for thousands of years, it was believed that there would always be a few maverick ants in the ant colony who, for some mysterious reason, decided to temporarily look away from the rotten leaves and shells to the blue sky. Then their world was different. Because they saw they were afraid? No, only when they saw, they wouldn't be afraid. A young slave, supporting his body with trembling hands, couldn't suppress his strong curiosity and concern. He raised his head in fear and looked ahead of the mountain road. He saw the Buddha's light, the lonely June Mo in the Buddha's light, and the Buddha's face. It turned out that Buddha looked like that. Looking at June Mo in the Buddha's light, he suddenly felt very ashamed and humiliated. An unknown source of courage came to his body. With a trembling hand, he reached for the hilt of his sword and grasped it again, then stood up shakily. He stood up. He looked around at his companions, wanting to say something, wanting to call on them to stand up as bravely as he did. But he found that no one was looking at him. His voice was too small in the powerful and solemn Buddhist chants. He felt a little lonely, so he understood Junmo's loneliness and pride. He wanted to say something to Junmo, but he didn't know what to say. He looked at the towering Buddha light, at the Buddha, and at the disciples of the Buddha. He wanted to debate with them, but he realized that he couldn't even understand the Buddhist scriptures they were singing. He was getting more and more irritated. He scratched his head anxiously. The more anxious he was, the more he found the Buddhist chants irritating. His chest heaved up and down, and his breathing became rapid. In the end, all of his emotions gathered together and turned into 3 words, bursting out from his lips. He looked at the Buddha and the Buddha's light and shouted, "Shut up!" At this moment, the Buddhist chanting seemed to stop for a moment. Many people heard these 3 words. Junmo lowered his head. The tiredness between his eyebrows somehow faded, and the corners of his mouth were slightly raised. Qin remembered the conversation he had with Yi Su in the wilderness many years ago. When the chief monk was preaching, I saw countless flying ants bathing in the light and rising. The flying ants will eventually fall, and they will never touch the sky. The ants can fly and fall, but they are better at climbing and good at laying the foundation for their companions. They are not afraid of sacrifice. If the ants pile up one by one, as long as there are enough of them, they can definitely pile up into a pile that can touch the sky. Qin was terrified, and he felt cold all over. Isu finally began to believe in the ants and began to lead them to the sky. However, he had long forgotten the words he had said in the past, the principles he had believed in. He looked at the slave standing in the Buddha's light and suddenly felt desperate. This was just the first ant, and there would be more ants standing up. Yes, the slaves kneeling in the Buddha's light looked at each other. Although they were confused, more people stood up. Some shouted to shut up, and more were silent. But they stood up. More and more slaves slowly stood up in the Buddha's light, like a black tide. The shouts were getting louder and louder, echoing between heaven and earth. "Shut up! Shut up!" Junmo lowered his head and listened. The corners of his mouth were getting higher and higher, and finally turned into a smile. At first, it was a smile, then a broad smile, and finally a hearty laugh. He laughed with great pleasure. Ha ha! Finally, they stood up, those who did not want to be slaves. Did you hear that? He looked at Qin, and the smile on his face gradually disappeared. He shouted, "Shut up!" His voice was like the sound of a bell, drifting between the peaks, refreshing the heart, and shocking the mind. All the peaks were silent for a moment. Qin and countless monks spat out blood and fell to the ground. The Buddhist chanting stopped. The Buddha in the form of the mountain was still quietly looking at him in front of him. Junmo looked at him and shouted, "Even if you are really the Buddha, so what? I cultivate Buddhism, and I am the Buddha. All living beings in the world can become Buddhas as long as they want to. Then why do I need you as the Buddha?" Under the peaks, in the sky, and on the ground, there was no supremacy. There were only millions of old and weak women and children, slaves covered with scars, and women who had been humiliated. All eyes were on him. All the power followed him, and handed over to him because of trust. An unimaginable majestic power filled his body. He raised the iron sword in his hand and chopped at the Buddha. At this moment, he was like a god, but he was not a god. His sword seemed to come from the netherworld, but he was not the messenger of the netherworld, nor was he the representative of the human world. He was just a scholar in the academy, the scholar with a high crown who wanted to draw his sword when he saw injustice. A clear shadow of the sword appeared in the sky, and the clouds were cut open. The sunlight shone through the gap, diluting the Buddha's light between the peaks, but still making the world bright. The iron sword fell. The Buddha was chopped by the iron sword. Many years ago, he chopped the stone statue of the Buddha into countless stones in the Lang Temple. Many years later, He really chopped the Buddha into countless stones. The thunder-like roars kept ringing. The cliffs cracked, the mud and stones fell, the trees were uprooted, and the temples were shaking. The wails and cries of the monks could be heard everywhere. Everyone left the peaks and looked at the collapsing cliffs from dozens of miles away. They were shocked by the scene and didn't know what to say. Qin Yin and many monks didn't go down the mountain road. Suddenly, an extremely harsh sound rang between heaven and earth. It was the sound of rocks rubbing against rocks deep underground. It was the sound of the heavy mountain breaking and then sliding on the broken section. The giant peak broke from the root and slowly fell toward the east. The mountain was too high, and it was very slow at first, but it gradually accelerated in the end. When a mountain finally fell on the field, it didn't hit anyone, but the earthquake caused a lot of trouble. The sky was full of smoke and dust, as if it had entered the night ahead of time. After a long time, the smoke and dust gradually dissipated, and people could see the scene in front of them clearly. They were shocked, speechless again. The giant peak was like the iron sword in Junmo's hand. It cut a hole dozens of miles wide in the earth, and the peak itself became the road paved on the hole. In the east, where the peak was pointing, there was a huge gap in the precipitous cliff wall, facing the peak from a distance. It looked like two bridges. As long as one walked across the field full of blooming wildflowers, they would be able to connect. The slaves looked at the big gap in amazement, and some bold people began to walk over there. The people in the west climbed the bridge formed by the giant peak and also began to walk over there. After a long time, they finally reached the bottom of the cliff and walked to the gap that had become a gentle slope. Millions of slaves walked up the slope. They walked in silence from dusk to early morning. They now knew what the ground was, but they still looked forward to it, and then nervous and even a little afraid. They walked in silence, with only the sound of footsteps, dense and rustling. Anyone who saw this scene and heard these footsteps would be moved. After walking for a long time, a light finally fell on the face of a boy in the front. He opened his mouth wide, his eyes slightly narrowed, and he was a little confused by the light. "Oh, Grandpa!" The sun was on the ground, as high as us. Facing the light of the morning sun, the slaves who had lived underground for generations finally came to the world above the ground. Just like the child, people admired, people were silent, people cried for those ancestors who never came to the ground and saw such a sun. It turned out that the sky was very close. It turned out that the earth had no edge. It turned out that this was the taste of freedom, crying and dancing, from early morning to sunset to the appearance of the stars in the sky and the bright moon. People's carnival never ended. Junmo walked under the Bodhi tree and began to rest. He looked at the traces left by Buddha's nirvana under the tree, did not say anything, looked up at the moon and said, "In this matter, teacher, you are not as good as me." This chapter is awesome. I suggest you go back to the preface. There are 2 paragraphs that are exactly the same. I'm awesome. Of course, I just copied it. Finally, I wrote this paragraph, which is one of the several chapters of the night. The last sentence is my comment, not about fighting, but about other aspects. Anyway, I'm happy today. Tomorrow, let's talk about tomorrow's things. Chapter 11:11. Compared with the dark and miserable world underground, the wilderness above ground was indeed as beautiful as the pure land of bliss at the end of summer. But how could there be a truly clean place? Although the right king's palace was in a difficult situation after being harassed by the Tang Empire's Western Expedition Army, it still ruled the vast wilderness and the battle continued. After a few days, Junmo returned to the Bodhi tree to rest again. At this moment, Tang came from afar and looked at him quietly for a long time. He said, "You've worked hard. I admire you." This was true admiration. Junmo had proved himself to be the most powerful among the powerhouses of their generation. But it was not because of his strength that he could make an arrogant master of the devil's doctrine like Tang admire him. Junmo stood up and said, "It's not hard to do what I want to do. Perhaps it wasn't mentally tiring, but his body was covered in dust and his face was full of fatigue. Anyone could see how much damage and exhaustion the past few years of endless fighting had taken on him. Tang looked back at the restless cavalrymen of the Right King's palace in the distant wilderness and said, "Leave it to me. We desolate men have wandered in the world for thousands of years. We are experienced. Go and rest." Jun Imo did not thank him, nor did he rest. He used his empty sleeves to wipe off the dust on his monk robe and turned to leave. Tang stroked the legendary Bodhi tree and said, "I thought you would cut down this tree. Don't touch this Bodhi tree and the chessboard in the peak. Youngest brother needs them." After saying this, Jun Imo walked toward the southeast without saying goodbye. There were still many things to deal with in the Central Plains. The underground slaves came out of the giant sinkhole and saw the real and boundless world. But this world was also a bigger giant sinkhole. He wanted to bring more people to a bigger world. This was something that the headmaster of the academy, youngest uncle, and the generation of the academy had never forgotten. Shouts gradually sounded in the wilderness. The slaves who had fought side by side with him for several years looked at his back reluctantly. The news of his departure spread further and further. Millions of people around the countless bonfires did not dare to ask him to stay. They all knelt down to see him off, like waves of wheat. Summer passed and autumn came. The flow of time seemed to have slowed down a lot. Too many things had happened in this year. For the common people who had been living a difficult life and waiting helplessly for the end, it was really difficult to bear. However, for those who were racing against time, they felt that time had passed too quickly. There were still many things that they had not done in time, and time had gone to who knew where. It had been a long year for the Tang Empire. It had been a long year. The imperial court and the three armies had worked together. They had finally withstood the terrifying pressure coming from all sides of the border and started the counterattack. In the past 2 seasons, the Tang army had destroyed the Golden Tribe and recovered the Qinghe River. They had shown their valiance and fearlessness to the world. The Tang did not have to worry about the most powerful enemy in the north of the north. They had paid a great price. The northern army and the wilderness of the army of the wilderness. Of the wilderness of the wilderness. Kingdom of wilderness. Kingdom of the wilderness of kingdom. And kingdom as of the Tang. Kingdom of Tang of war. It was not time to recuperate and return to the Xiangwan plain. But the Tang Empire needed to rest. The human world ushered in a short but precious period of peace. Because everyone knew that the peace was just an illusion. The main force of the Tang army stopped at Qinghe Prefecture and did not continue to the south. They rested and reorganized their navy. However, the South Jin Kingdom had fallen into chaos because of Ning Kei's bloody assassination that did not care about the status of the powerhouses. It seemed that the once second most powerful country in the world could not stop the iron hooves of the Tang army from the south. On the 2 most important battlefields, Hao Yi Taoism had suffered a crushing defeat and had lost all initiative. Based on the current situation in the South Jin Kingdom, the West Hill Divine Palace finally realized their position. They withdrew the troops that were invading the Great River as quickly as possible and withdrew all the powerhouses back to the West Hill Divine Kingdom. In the human world, only the West Hill Divine Kingdom, the Yin Kingdom, and the corner of the East Land were still under the control of Taoism. Some of the more important places were already under the control of the Tang Empire. Even the small countries that were loyal to the divine halls of Song, Qi, Liang, and Chun were in an extremely turbulent situation. Chun Pippi led more than a dozen disciples left by Yi Su and even more followers, ignoring the danger of being chased by the experts of the divine hall. They kept preaching along the coastline, igniting the flames of apostasy one after another. The situation of Taoism was as precarious as a pile of eggs, and it seemed that it would be destroyed at any time. The reason why the flames of the new stream burned so fiercely was not only because of the shock and indescribable impact of Yisu's sanctification on the ordinary believers, but also because of the situation in the world. Many people, including some divine priests of the divine halls of West Hill, thought that the world had been settled. The divine halls of West Hill would inevitably be replaced by the Tang Empire, and Taoism would naturally be replaced by the new stream supported by the Academy. Countless divine priests of the Taoist temples in the cities and towns fled with the gold and silver they had plundered over the years. Not to mention exterminating the new stream, the true devout believers could not even find a suitable place to pray for Hao Yian's mercy. But was the world situation really settled? If the Tang Empire and the Academy could not conquer the Peach Mountain, the divine halls of West Hill would still stand on the peak and look at the human world coldly and arrogantly. With the wealth and resources they had accumulated over the years, they could still have a lot and survive for a long time. Who knew what would happen in the future? 1,000 years ago, Taoism gathered the whole world to fight against the Tang Empire. Countless powerhouses of the knowing destiny state left their seclusion deep in the mountains and went to Chang. The Tang Empire was in a dangerous situation at that time, and the world situation seemed to be settled. But who would have thought that the headmaster of the Academy alone could solve all the problems and establish the Tang Empire's undefeated reputation for 1,000 years? They could not declare victory until the final victory, and they could not stop fighting until the battle was over. Jun Mo believed in the latter, while Ning Ke and Yi Hongyu believed in the former. All in all, the vast human world had never been simple. Moreover, those who stood at the top of the human world knew that if they could not determine the outcome of the Hao Yian Divine Kingdom, the outcome of the human world could be reversed at any time. Of course, the outcome of the human world was also very important. Everyone's eyes were following the traces left by Ning, Quebec. They watched him go from the wilderness to the Qinghe River and then to the Southeast Sea. They all thought that he would go north to the Yan Kingdom, because where Longqing was, they believed that the next person he would kill would be Longqing. The powerhouses of the Divine Hall and the Yin Kingdom's cavalry were waiting for him, but he never came. No one knew that Ning Ke was still in the Lang Temple. He cultivated in the temple, rested in front of the ruins of the Buddha statue, and learned how to smash stones from the children in the small town in front of the Wa Mountain. From last night until now, I've been thinking about it for a long time. There's an important plot at the end, but I still haven't figured it out. Or rather, I can't get past myself, so I'm still hesitating. Just by looking at the chapter name, you'll know that it's very important. Just by looking at it, you'll know that it's very important. If you can figure it out, I will continue writing at night. If not, I will continue thinking at night. Of course, to avoid waiting, I will only write these 2,000 words today. So, I have a deal with you. Chapter 11-12. When Ning Ke and Sang Sang were besieged by the cultivation world, they went to the West Wilderness through the Buddhist chessboard. The Lang Temple in the autumn rain suffered the wrath of the Academy. Jun Mo's iron sword pierced through the air and cut the largest Buddha statue on the top of the Tile Mountain into countless pieces. The pieces rolled down from the peak and piled up in the valley, crushing half of the old temple. Fortunately, the huge rocks did not cause a disaster to the town. They had been soaked by the sea rain and wind for years and were gradually covered with moss. Instead, they had become a rare scenery. When the Yulon Hungry Ghost Festival stopped and the incense in the Lang Temple declined, it had become the only way to attract tourists. The main income of the town's residents now came from the stones that the Buddha statues had turned into. The people broke these boulders into countless small pieces, then carved them into Buddha statues and sold them to the tourists who admired them. Of course, it was very difficult to break the boulders. Even the heaviest hammer and the sharpest iron knife could not help the residents achieve their goal easily. The most common method for people was to burn them with fire and pour them with water. The fire was a wildfire ignited by the hay in the fields outside the town. The water was the seawater from the Tile Mountain. The quarry in the southeast of the town was filled with smoke from morning to night. The hot steam rose, and the slightly red rocks suddenly made a sizzling sound when they encountered the cold seawater. This repeated tastelessly again and again. Eventually, there would be a clear crack on the hard rocks, and that was the key to breaking the rocks. Ninkei stood on the hillside beside the quarry and watched the process of the residents breaking the stones. He watched in silence for a long time, watching the alternation of fire and water and the cracks that appeared on the moss-covered boulders. He found that most of the cracks followed a certain pattern when they appeared, and two oblique cracks would meet at a certain place. The two cracks formed together and looked like a word. He naturally remembered the sword marks on the rocks at the bottom of the Daming Lake in the depths of the Tianchi mountain many years ago. Youngest uncle had used a sword to write countless words outside the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine, thus making the great blockage formation left by the great divine priest of light, the founder of the Devil's Doctrine, useless. The rock was broken into smaller pieces, which were then smashed by the adults with iron. Then the children rushed over and picked up the stones of different sizes that they could carry. Then they carefully selected the stones and separated them according to their size and the direction of the stone lines. Finally, they were delivered to the hands of the stonemasons. Of course, most of the stonemasons in the town became a monk halfway through their cultivation. Ninkei, for example, only began to learn Buddhism halfway through his cultivation. However, they carved day and night and became very skilled at it. A square stone about a foot long could be turned into a beautifully carved Buddha statue in 10 days and nights. After Ninkei finished looking at the broken rocks, he watched the stonemasons carve Buddha. After watching for 3 days, he began to learn Buddha carving from the stonemasons. It did not take long for him to become the best carver in Wa Mountain. In the last few years of the Buddha's chessboard, he had made the entire mountain look like a Buddha. How difficult could the stones be for him? However, the Buddha statue he carved was very different from the one made by the stonemasons in the town. The stonemasons praised his comprehension and skills and raised many opinions, but he only smiled and did not explain. The Buddha statue that Ninkei carved did not have a wide forehead and big ears, let alone a compassionate one. Instead, it was a slightly plump young woman with her hair combed into a bun. It was obvious that the young woman's expression was extremely cold. One day, it was raining in the Lang Temple. Ninkei was holding a stone outside the temple and continuing to carve. Suddenly, a lazy voice came from behind. Did she successfully lose weight? She lost some weight in Chaoyang City in the chessboard. Ninkei placed the stone statue in a dozen stone statues beside him. He put down his carving knife, patted the dust off his body, and stood up. The man said, "She lost so little weight in 1,000 years? It seems that Hao Ian is not omnipotent." Ninkei smiled and turned around to hug him. He said, "Didn't you like her before? Why are you so mean now? It doesn't suit your high and mighty identity as the leader of the new stream." Chun Pippi curled his lips in boredom and said, "Do you like her high and mighty, or do you like her as before?" Ninkei thought about it and found that the answer was indeed obvious. He smiled helplessly and looked at Tang Xiaodang, who was standing beside him. He was surprised to find that she still had a ponytail and said, "Not married yet?" Tang Xiaodang was not shy and said, "Waiting for my brother to come." Chun Pippi sighed and said, "I don't expect to wait for my father's approval." Ninkei looked at him again and looked at the loose indigo robe he was wearing. He thought of the Abbey Dean who wore indigo robes twice in Chong, and then found that he did look like the Abbey Dean after losing weight. The three of them walked to the pavilion nearby. The autumn rain fell on the eaves of the pavilion and accumulated for a long time before turning into a thin stream, flowing down the pillars and wetting the ground under the pavilion. Chun Pippi asked, "Have you finished?" Ninkei took out a scroll from his arms and handed it to him. He said, "It would be better if Yisu or eldest brother wrote it. You know, I am a non-believer after all." It was something he wrote when he was meditating and observing the stones in the Lang Temple. If it was approved, it might become the last and most important volume of the doctrine of the new stream. Chun Pippi took the scroll and said, "Eldest brother will have a higher chance of success. It will be harder for me to do it. But don't worry, your efforts will not be wasted in my hands." Ninkei said, "We don't have much time. We have to hurry." Chun Pippi opened the scroll and looked at the words about the new world, the divine kingdom, and the afterlife. He frowned and said, "What a magnificent picture." Ning Ke said, "From the master to the uncle to our generation, the Academy has spent 1,000 years to prepare. It would not be fun if we can't have a magnificent picture." Chun Pippi put away the file and looked at the weariness and haggard expression on his face. He thought about what he had done in the past 6 months. He took out a small porcelain bottle from his sleeve and handed it over, saying, "Take it when you need it." Ning Ke's expression changed slightly when he smelled the fragrance of the medicine in the porcelain bottle. He had taken this medicine before and knew how precious it was. He said, "At our current state, a heavenly power pill can only give us a chance. There is no need to waste it. I kept this medicine for senior brother Yisu to help him break through the 5 states." Chin Pippi was silent for a moment and said, "But I didn't expect that he could no longer cultivate. Now that he is dead, what's the use of keeping it? Even if it can't help you break through the state, it can at least help you heal the hidden injuries in your body. It sounds cool to kill people from thousands of miles away, but it is extremely hard. You seem to be resting in the Lang Temple these days, but you are actually exhausting your energy. Both the Academy and the new stream need you to keep standing." Ning Ke thought about it and didn't say anything else. He put the porcelain bottle into his sleeve. Tang Xiaodang said, "If youngest uncle thinks that the gift is too expensive and can't repay it, you can return it." Ning Ke smiled and said, "You are not married to him yet, and you are already working for him? Tell me, what do you want?" Tang Xiaodang pointed at the row of stone statues outside the pavilion and said, "Give me one." Ning Ke didn't expect this. He walked out of the pavilion and picked up a stone statue that he was most satisfied with. He handed it to her and said, "It's not like I haven't seen the real person. Why do you need to look at this cold statue?" Tang Xiaodang took the stone statue and wiped the rain off with her sleeve. She put it away carefully and said, "If you can find her, why do you need to carve these cold statues?" Ning Ke was a little embarrassed and said, "I'm mainly learning how to break stones." Tang Xiaodang patted her chest and said, "If you want to learn, I can teach you." Many years ago, on the streets of Chong, and there was a little girl whose chest could break stones. After so many years, she was still as heroic as ever. Ning Ke recalled the scene and felt a little emotional. As a youngest uncle, it was not convenient for him to see where her hands were. But Chun Pippi didn't have such a taboo. He murmured and sighed, "It's not big." Outside the Lang Temple, thousands of followers of the new stream were waiting for Chun Pippi and Tang Xiaodang. They were going to the Song Kingdom. Just like Ning Ke killing people from thousands of miles away, they were preaching from thousands of miles away. The scroll had been entrusted to them. Ning Ke didn't want to waste their time and sent them out of the temple. After Chun Pippi and Tang Xiaodang left, he continued to carve Buddha statues. Well, statues of Sang Sang. He made hundreds of statues of Sang Sang and lined them up in front of the hall. The statues of Sang Sang were either deep in thought, looking up at the sky, or looking at the world with their hands behind their back. There was only one thing in common. They were expressionless. The autumn rain fell from time to time, and the statues of Sang Sang were wet from time to time. He squinted and stared, holding his waist and arms, admiring the changes of the stone statues in the autumn rain. The situation of the world continued to change as time went by. The flames of war were everywhere, and the killing intent was everywhere. The war between the Tang Empire and Taoism had both wins and losses. The strategy of the West Hill Divine Palace played a certain role. The most important thing was that the Tang Empire, or the Academy, still couldn't find a way to cross that small town. In fact, Ning Ke didn't care much about that small town. Not many people could guess his thoughts. Longqing was one of them. He stood in the bleak autumn wind at the top of Chongjing City of the Yin Kingdom, quietly waiting for Ning Ke's arrival. Many people had always thought that the battle between Ning Ke and Longqing was inevitable and would happen at any time. However, unexpectedly, Ning Ke didn't come, and the battle never happened. Ning Ke looked at Sang Sang in the Lang Temple in the autumn rain. What was Sang Sang looking at now? The night in the cold region of the far north was long and cold. The hot sea had long been covered with thick snow. The light in the yurts left by the desolate man's tribe seemed to be frozen to pieces. Sang Sang sat by the light and looked at her fingertips. There was a bubble on her fingertip. The surface of the bubble was smooth, and it looked crystal and transparent under the light. The shape was extremely perfect. The indigo lion lay at her feet and looked at the bubble. Its eyes were full of curiosity, but it was instinctively afraid. It always felt that if it broke the bubble with its claws, the world would be destroyed. Ninkei looked at the two cracks on the surface of the rock in the Lang Temple. There seemed to be two tiny cracks on the surface of the bubble between Song Song's fingers, and it would burst in the next moment. Like the hundreds of stone statues in the Lang Temple, her face was still expressionless, but it didn't mean indifference. It was more like calmness. She gently stroked her bulging belly. There was a delicious smell of soup coming from the corner of the yurt. In the morning, the indigo lion hunted a snow chicken. She was making chicken soup. I suddenly don't want to use my chest to break the big stone, or I may continue to use in the next chapter. Well, it was hard today. Fortunately, I can sit up in the end. Chapter 11:13. Firstly, I want to thank those students. Secondly, regarding the Heavenly Power Pill, I really forgot about it. Yesterday, when I was writing it, I tried to recall it seriously, only to realize that memory is really the most unreliable thing. Thank you to the students who pointed it out. I deeply apologize and will make changes. Lastly, wanting to write a different and awesome plot is really a painful thing, especially when one's ability isn't particularly strong. We will succeed. Thank you. Chapter 11:14. The bubble on Song Song's fingertip was perfect, but it was not a perfect circle. It had curves and an indescribable sense of beauty, just like her bulging belly. It seemed fragile, but it was incomparably firm. It was space itself. She was expressionless, but she was not indifferent, just calm. It seemed that the two cracks on the bubble and the bulging belly indicated something or the future, which was constantly changing her. A Taoist dressed in green suddenly appeared at the edge of the forest beside the cold snow sea. He changed the direction of the wind and the temperature of the field. He was the strongest person in the world now, possessing the wisest and far-sighted vision. However, the strange thing was that he turned a blind eye to the faint light in the yurt. He didn't turn a blind eye to it, but he really didn't see it. He didn't see the oil lamp, didn't see the steam rising from the pot of snow chicken soup, and didn't see Sang Sang by the window because Sang Sang didn't want him to see her. With a thought, he isolated the wooden yurt by the sea from the real world. That was the world of Hao Ian, and even he could not see it. Chun Mao stood quietly at the edge of the frozen forest, looking at the snow dancing wildly on the surface of the hot sea like smoke and dust, looking at the footprints of the beast that were gradually covered by the wind and snow. Although he did not see what he wanted to see, he did not leave because he had an intuition that the person he had been searching for should be here. Sang Sang sat quietly by the window. The dim light of the oil lamp shone on her chubby cheeks, and her hand fell on her bulging belly, motionless. She did not look at him by the forest, nor did she do anything, not even think. This was the 7th time the Mao had come to the cold snow sea to find her. Every time he came, he would get closer to her. He did not know whether he would see her face and approach her world the next time he came. The late autumn night in the north was extremely long, as if it would never stop. Only at certain moments would the sun show its face. The mouse stood by the forest for a whole night. His eyes were dazzled by the red sunlight, and he once again looked at the wooden yurts around the snow sea. After confirming that there was no trace of her, he disappeared again. In the corner of the yurt, the indigo lion lying by the stove was motionless. It was instinctively afraid of the human being, especially after seeing its owner's silence several times. It realized how terrifying the human being was. For the whole night, it didn't even dare to breathe, let alone wagging its tail to beg its owner to give it a drumstick. The indigo lion heaved a sigh of relief when the man finally left. It stood up on all fours and shook its head to make its slightly numb body more active. When it was about to show off to Sang Sang, it found that Sang Sang was still in the same position as last night, sitting quietly by the window without thinking, as if she didn't know that it had left. Soon after the sun rose, it fell into the dark ocean again. Sang Sang looked at the cold world outside the window. When the oil lamp burned out, the figure in green clothes appeared again in the woods. Sang Sang was still sitting quietly. Chen Mao left again. She sat there quietly, not sleeping, not eating, not talking, not thinking, not moving. A cold wind that didn't belong to nature blew, and the aura of heaven and earth changed slightly. A scholar in a cotton-padded jacket appeared in the woods. He looked around, as if he was looking for something. He was covered with dust, haggard, and extremely thin. He hadn't rested for a long time, and the cold wind could knock him down at any time. Sang Sang finally moved. She turned her head and shifted her gaze from the snow-covered sea to the woodland. Her eyes fell on the scholar, and a complicated emotion appeared in her indifferent eyes. She suddenly wanted to walk out of the yurt and go back to her own world, because she felt that the scholar was trustworthy, but also a little scared and disgusted. So she didn't do anything in the end. The drunkard finally arrived the second day after the eldest brother left. He was the most powerful man who had experienced the everlasting night. The flagon on his waist swayed in the wind and snow, as if the wine in it had been drunk. Sang Sang didn't even look at him, nor was she as silent and cautious as the Chun Mao when he appeared. Finally, they all left. Sang Sang stood up by the window and walked to the stove. She looked at the pot of chicken soup that had long been boiled dry and smelled the pungent, burnt smell. She was silent for a long time. He didn't go home that night so that she could finish the chicken soup in case it went bad. Did he finish the chicken soup in the end? Sang Sang thought of the note, and her right hand gently stroked her bulging belly. She suddenly felt very lonely and wanted someone to accompany her. All this happened when she thought of that person. This was her world. In this world, time was still passing. The chicken soup would be boiled dry, and the life in her belly would keep growing. She was getting weaker and weaker. If she couldn't maintain this world, it would be the moment of danger. She put the pot of burnt chicken in front of the indigo lion and ignored its pitiful look. She took out an abacus from under the table and began to calculate the possible dangers and solutions. She had to provide endless nutrients for the little life in her belly, and, at the same time, she had to be isolated from the human world. She didn't have enough energy to calculate like before. Her chess skills were still unbeatable, and she was still unbeatable at the poker table. Neither Chen Pippi nor Song Qian and other human geniuses were her opponents. But she couldn't calculate everything in the world. She had to rely on humans' calculation tools to reason and calculate those important things. She was the rule of this world. However, after she came to the human world, she was contaminated by the mortal world, and her speed was not as fast as those 3 human beings. This was a very dangerous thing. If she had to escape, how could she be faster? Clap, 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 clap. The crisp sound of plates hitting against each other came from the dark yurt. It sounded like a cheerful song. The indigo lion was gnawing on the burnt chicken bones, happily wagging its tail. Song Song's right hand moved quickly on the abacus, leaving a series of residual shadows. She looked calm and focused. The perfect bubble appeared in her left hand again. On the smooth surface of the bubble, more than 10 light spots appeared. If compared with the map of the human world, those light spots were Healan City, Chong, and the West Hill, the Kingdom of Song, the Lang Temple, the depths of the West Wilderness, the beginning or the end of those space passages. The last autumn rain fell, and the Central Plains were extremely cold. The war in the human world had finally reached the last step. The Tang Empire reorganized its navy, and tens of thousands of ships raced to the South Jin Kingdom. The South Jin Kingdom, which had been frightened by Ning Kei's killing of their emperor and ministers, had no power to resist. Coupled with the reputation of the sword Garrett, the gate of Lincoln was opened within 10 days. The army of the Great River Kingdom also crossed the surging Yellow River and headed north. The divine chariot and the royal chariot led tens of thousands of people of the Great River Kingdom. They did something that no one had dared to think of for generations. They marched towards the West Hill Divine Kingdom. The Tang army had entered the border of the West Hill Divine Kingdom and was less than 200 miles away from Peach Mountain. The sacred sedan of judgment had arrived at the Muyu town in the south and was only 300 miles away from Peach Mountain. The West Hill Divine Kingdom was besieged from both the north and the south. Although they had recalled all the powerhouses of Haotian Taoism and tens of thousands of cavalrymen of the Divine Halls had set up several lines of defense around Peach Mountain, everyone knew that the Divine Halls were in danger. On the balcony of the White Divine Palace on the peak of Peach Mountain, Xiong Chumo was looking at the human world shrouded by the autumn rain. His haggard face was filled with frustration. He did not know what else he could do. It seemed that it was the last moment for him to conclude his life, but he did not know how to conclude it. Where was the Abbey Dean? What was he doing? Why didn't Hao Ian respond to the prayers of the devout believers? Why was it that the blasphemers had won one victory after another, but the heavenly messenger had yet to arrive? What was going on? Was Hao Ian Taoism, which had ruled the world for countless years, going to be destroyed? Xiong Chumo was enraged out of desperation. The filthiest words and the most vicious curses burst out from his mouth and resounded through the entire Peach Mountain like thunder. Those words were meant for the Abbey Dean. However, even at this moment, he still did not dare to say the Abbey Dean's name, which made him look extremely pitiful. The mountain wind blew and dispersed the misty rain, revealing the small town at the foot of the mountain. In the autumn wind and rain, the town was still as tranquil as the sky, unaffected. Looking at the town, Xiong Chumo gradually calmed down. Even if the Abbey Dean was not coming back, as long as that person was there, the Tang and the Academy would not be able to get close to Peach Mountain. Then there was nothing to worry about. There were still many things to worry about. Xiong Chumo looked at the distant mountain in the autumn rain. He seemed to have seen Su Shi's flag and the fearsome armored cavalry of the Tang army. He felt the weight on his shoulders getting heavier. Long Qing still refuses to bring the rest of the people back. What is he doing? Is he really going to disobey the decree? And what is he doing in Yin Kingdom? Waiting to be killed by Ning Ke? Xiong Chumo roared angrily in a low voice. The middle-aged priest stood beside him and said calmly, "If he can really keep Ning Ke in Yin Kingdom, it will be a great achievement for the Divine Halls." Xiong Chumo sneered, "That depends on whether he has the ability or not." The middle-aged priest said calmly, "If he can't, then no one else can." Xiong Chumo slightly frowned and turned to him. He did not expect that the priest would have such a high opinion of Long Qing. He said carefully, "Hong Mu was killed by Ning Quebec. Long Qing has not even passed the 5 states. How can he be a match for him? Years ago, I saw Long Qing climb up from the abyss. If Hong Mu and Long Qing fought, Hong Mu would be the one to die. As for Long Qing and Ning Ke, who is stronger and who will be the final winner, no one else has the right to judge. They can only fight for the last time." The middle-aged priest said calmly. He had always played the role of a bystander in Taoism. He knew more than most people, so he was calmer. Xiong Chumo paused for a while and said, "The enemy is coming. Taoism has to do something." The middle-aged priest looked at the small town in the autumn rain and said, "I will go and have a look." Chapter 11:15. There was only one butcher shop in the town. There is only one butcher in the world. The middle-aged Taoist stood outside the door and looked at the butcher who was covered in grease but no sweat. He said, "Since you are here, you have to do something." The butcher was dividing the pork. Hearing this, he kept silent for a long time and asked in a hoarse voice, "Is your senior brother really going to do that rebellious thing?" The middle-aged Taoist said calmly, "What do you mean by rebellious? First of all, we have to determine the concept of Taoism. You and the drunkard have been hiding under Hao Ian's eyes for tens of thousands of years. Isn't that against her Taoism? The butcher's ink-like thick eyebrows slowly rose as he said, "How dare you?" The middle-aged Taoist said, "Helping my senior brother is also good for you." The butcher said, "To help your senior brother, I just need to stay in the town and not come here. Because you and I both know that helping your senior brother and helping Taoism are two different things." The middle-aged Taoist kept silent for a while and said, "The agreement between you and Hao Ian is still valid." The butcher remained silent for a long time. At first, it was because he needed time to think about what the Abbey Dean wanted him to do. Later, it was because someone had come. Hearing the footsteps, he asked, "What do you need me to do?" The middle-aged Taoist stood outside the door and did not look back at the approaching figure. He said, "The Tang army is armored and heavy cavalry. No one can stop them. I don't want the Divine Hall to be peaceful forever. I just want some pavilions and halls." The butcher put down his knife and said indifferently, "Is that all?" The middle-aged Taoist said, "If you can kill the people from the academy, it will be the best." The butcher and the drunkard were the two grand cultivators who had lived the longest in the world, even longer than the Buddha Yard and the headmaster of the academy. They had been living in seclusion until the headmaster ascended to heaven and Hao Ian came to the world. During these years, the drunkard had fought several times, which made the academy feel pressured. But the butcher had never done anything. Of course, he was strong, even the strongest in the world. He was different from the chief monk of scripture who had been buried with the Prajna Peak. He was strong, but his blade was even stronger because he was good at killing. For countless years, he had killed pigs, sheep, cows, and people. His strength lay in killing. He had lived in seclusion for many years and had killed fewer people. It was not because of a change in his state of mind, but because of the headmaster's request. The butcher said with an indifferent expression, "They're just some pigs and sheep. There's no harm in killing them." As soon as he finished speaking, the sound of cicadas rang out in the small town. At this time, the autumn rain was chilly, and the sound of cicadas in the rain was even more mournful. Amidst the sound of cicadas, a little girl in a yellow dress slowly walked over from the other side of the town. She walked to the butcher's shop and looked inside. The rainwater at the end of her ponytail was like fine pearls. As she moved, it floated to the ground inside the threshold. Then, the tip of her nose wrinkled beautifully. It was very cute. She thought the smell of blood in the butcher's shop was too strong and unpleasant, just like the butcher's words. "Others are pigs and sheep, but you are a dog. I've never understood why people like you and the drunkard are willing to be dogs. Is this matter really that interesting?" Yu Yin's young face was full of inquiry. Because of her seriousness, she looked very cute. Her yellow dress was wet by the rain, but she did not look embarrassed. Instead, she was still cute. Her black ponytail was naturally the cutest. She was such a cute and scary little girl. She had recovered from the wounds she suffered in the battle with the national master of the Golden Tribe in the wilderness. She did not stop and traveled thousands of miles south to the West Hill Divine Kingdom. How could the tens of thousands of cavalrymen from the divine halls of West Hill stop her? It was not until she came to the door of the butcher's shop that the divine halls of West Hill noticed her arrival. The sharp warning sound cut through the rain, and the sound of hoofbeats could be heard. Countless people came to the small town, but did not dare to step on the long street. The butcher looked at the little girl outside the butcher's shop and guessed her identity. He said expressionlessly, "It's better to be a dog in peace than a person in chaos. This is what your teacher said to me in the town." Yu Yin's eyes fell on the knife in his hand. She said casually, "What he said might not be right." The butcher said, "I heard that you are this generation's leader of the Devil's Doctrine. The Devil's Doctrine emphasizes on absorbing the chi of heaven and earth into the body, which is similar to what I realized years ago. In this way, I should be your ancestor. But since you don't even care about what the headmaster of the academy said, I guess you don't care about this either." Yu Yin put her hands behind her back and stood on tiptoe to look into the butcher's shop. She looked like a cute little girl who was learning from adults. She said casually, The Enlightenment doctrine has always been good at deceiving and destroying our ancestors. The butcher said indifferently, "You are an interesting kid. No one has dared to talk to me like this for many years. Maybe you can be proud of it." He had lived in a world for countless years. In terms of age, he could call everyone a kid. Yu was not annoyed. She looked at him and said, "I also think you are interesting." The butcher asked, "Where?" Yu said slowly, "No one has ever dared to talk to me like this except for my teacher. I think he was the one who talked to you like this many years ago. It seems that he is more powerful." The butcher was silent for a moment and suddenly threw the knife in his hand. The butcher's knife, which was covered in blood and oil, fell heavily on the ground outside the sill with a loud bang. Smoke and dust rose, and gravel shot into the dense autumn rain. It was as if a mountain had fallen from the sky to the mortal world. "If you can hold this knife, we will talk about other things," he said. Yu squatted down with her hands behind her back and looked at the legendary knife for a while. Then she carefully rolled up her sleeves and took out a handkerchief. She pinched the back of the knife with only 2 fingers through the handkerchief. She used 2 fingers to slowly lift the heaviest knife in the world off the ground. As she moved, the weight of the iron knife passed her feet. With 2 crisp sounds, 2 cobweb-like cracks appeared on the bluestone floor outside the door sill of the butcher's shop. Throughout this process, her brows were furrowed and her expression was solemn. Then she put down the iron knife. "Very good. You're qualified to talk to me." The butcher looked at her coldly and said, "Although it was a bit hard, you lifted it after all." Yu shook her head and carefully wiped her fingers with the handkerchief. She said, "You old people always like to talk to yourselves. I just think it is too dirty. Do you think it is really heavy?" She frowned and concentrated because she did not want her fingers to be stained with blood or oil. The butcher was silent for a long time and said, "You are indeed very strong. Thank you for your recognition, Senior." Yu said casually. She was not serious at all. Her strength did not need anyone's approval, even if that person was the legendary butcher. "If you were given the same time as me, no, even half or even 1/10 of my time, you might be able to defeat me and even obtain the real immortality." The butcher looked at her and said, "Unfortunately, you will not have that time anymore. So you are not strong enough. No matter who comes from the academy, it is not enough because you are not strong enough." Yu said, "You have not been in the world for many years. You do not know that the strongest thing in the academy is the word strong." The butcher said, "Do you want to talk about Ninkei, who inherited Kuharen's legacy? He is indeed good. Unfortunately, 1,000 miles of wind blew in Yangzhou City. Now he is lacking breath." As soon as he finished speaking, he raised his eyebrows again. Footsteps were heard in the autumn rain again. The footsteps were very steady. A powerhouse like the butcher could naturally hear that there was something wrong with the center of gravity of the person's body. However, it was still so steady, which meant that it was terrifying. The person was wearing a shabby monk's robe. His short hair was like angry pine, but his expression was very calm. He walked in the rain, and the distance between each step seemed to be measured with a ruler in advance. There was no deviation. Junimo had always been a person who would never make a mistake. The butcher looked at him with a serious expression and said, "Or would you like to try and see if you can pick up my knife?" Junimo took the handkerchief from Yulian's hand and carefully wiped the rain off his face. He glanced at the knife on the ground and did not understand what the butcher was talking about. He looked at the butcher as if he was looking at an idiot. Yu looked at the butcher as if she was looking at an ignorant child. She said, "I said that you don't care about the world, and you really don't. You have no idea that the strongest person in the academy has never been Ning Quebec. Indeed, the strongest people in the academy had always been Junimo and Yu. The butcher was perhaps the strongest person in the cultivation world, or even in the entire history of cultivation. The strongest here did not refer to the state of cultivation, but specifically referred to the strength and strength. Therefore, the 2 strongest people in the academy came to meet him. The butcher was naturally not in a good mood to be looked at, and ignored by 2 juniors of the academy. His face became a little gloomy, but he did not say anything. Yu Yin asked, "Is it enough now?" The butcher said, "It is enough. You could try to fight with me together." Yu Yin said, "The headmaster said that words must be justified, and it is very important. Jun Mo likes to use peaceful means before resorting to force. Therefore, since it is enough, maybe we can talk about something first." The butcher took a deep breath. He had been prepared for a real battle for countless years, but he was rebuffed by Yu Yin's words. His depressed mood turned into one word: speak. Yu Yin said, "It seems to be a little inconvenient today." The butcher squinted his eyes and slightly raised his eyebrows. He stared at her without saying a word. Yu Yin said, "I'm not afraid of you. What's the use of staring at me?" Then she turned around and looked at the middle-aged Taoist. She said, "Do you know why it is inconvenient?" The middle-aged Taoist sighed and said, "I guess it is because I am here. But powerful people, why do you care about me?" Yu Yin said, "Of course it is because you are very strong." The middle-aged Taoist smiled and said, "I have done nothing since the beginning." Yu Yin said calmly, "That is why it is so great. Until now, I do not even know your name. I have to say that it is very admirable." To the human world, she was a great fog. However, this seemingly calm and harmless middle-aged Taoist had silently guarded the Jisho Abbey for decades. Even she could not see through him. His true face seemed to be hidden in the fog, so it was naturally worth being vigilant. "I have been feeling unwell these few days and even have mental problems. I have been adjusting, and it is all right. Let's put our palms together, hug, and pat each other on the back. Everyone is strong." You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.